Hey everyone! Tonight, we're diving into the surprisingly busy and often outrageous life of Paleolithic humans. What did cavemen really do all day? It turns out it wasn't all about smashing rocks and discovering fire in slow-motion montages. So buckle up, grab your favorite snack, and let's unravel the truth about how our ancient ancestors survived the wild, harsh world they lived in. But before we get into it, I want to take a quick second to ask you to like the video if you're already enjoying what I'm doing here. And don't forget to subscribe if you're into these deep dives into history. Also, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm always so curious to see who's joining us from all around the globe. All right, now that the pleasantries are out of the way, let's jump right in. Imagine it's early morning. The sky is just beginning to brighten, and the world is waking up. For most of the cavemen, their day began just before dawn, or more likely, whenever the wind was loud enough to wake them up, or when someone nearby decided to cough their lungs out. They didn't have alarm clocks after all. The majority of these ancient humans spent their nights on animal hides. No cozy bed frames or fluffy pillows, sometimes with a few dried leaves or grass tossed in for some cushioning. And let me tell you, it wasn't a quiet slumber. If you were part of a tribe, chances were you were sleeping close to others, often in tight-knit groups. Privacy? That was a foreign concept. Your life was an open book. Whether you liked it or not, everyone heard everything. The first thing you did when you woke up? Well, check the fire. If it went out overnight, someone would have to get it started again. And trust me, starting a fire from scratch wasn't as easy as just flicking a lighter. It involved patience, skill, and a lot of rubbing sticks together. And if it was cold, which it often was, crankiness would set in until that fire came back to life. Now, once the fire was rolling, you'd take a look at your tools: spears, knives, scrapers, anything that helped you hunt or defend yourself. These tools were your lifeline. If they weren't sharp, well, good luck eating, staying protected, or making clothes from animal hides. Most people didn't just make their own tools. They learned from others. Some were better than others, and borrowing gear from someone more skilled was common. But if you borrowed, expect to repay the favor. Children were typically the first ones up, scurrying around looking for food or something to do. The adults? Well, they took their time, slowly waking up, preparing for the day, checking traps, gathering water, anything to get moving. There was no taking it slow back then. There wasn't time for it. Your goal was simple: stay warm, find food, and avoid getting hurt. Think about it. Waking up to find the fire still burning and nothing too dangerous outside. That was a victory in itself. When it came to hygiene, it wasn't what you'd expect. Cavemen didn't have a shower schedule or care about looking good. Cleanliness was purely practical. You washed yourself when it became a problem, usually when the smell was strong enough that the group had to take notice. And for those rare times when there was a nearby stream, that's when they bathed, but only if the water wasn't freezing. Other times, you might wipe yourself off with leaves, dirt, or even animal fat. Yes, animal fat. It helped with warmth and kept those pesky insects at bay. Teeth? Well, cavemen didn't have fancy toothbrushes. Instead, they chewed on fibrous sticks or bones to clean their teeth. Imagine that. No toothpaste. But hey, no candy either. So they didn't have cavities, just tooth wear from grinding tough meat and sand that got into their food. As for hair, it was often long and tied back, or just left to grow wild. Lice were common, and some groups used ash or animal oils to try and combat it. Hair care wasn't a big priority, but let's just say it wasn't a glamorous lifestyle. Clothing? That was functional. Animal hides, usually. But they weren't breathable, and washing them, not a thing. The smell? Yeah, it was probably pretty distinct. But here's the kicker. Despite all the lack of modern hygiene products, early humans managed to stay relatively healthy. Their immune systems were strong, And they had a community-wide understanding of cleanliness that helped avoid large outbreaks. The trick was keeping close to the fire and not doing anything too extreme, like rolling in a dead animal for camouflage, which, by the way, some people did. Breakfast was never a set routine. The lucky ones woke up to dried meat hanging by the fire. But for most, it was a gamble. If last night's hunt was a failure, or the food had already been swiped by a sneaky raccoon-like creature, breakfast meant foraging. That meant digging for roots, scanning berry bushes, or searching for edible plants, anything that wasn't already claimed by animals or other kids. Seasons dictated what they found. In spring, greens. In summer, fruits. And in winter, well, it was a little tougher. The choices were slim. If you were lucky, you found some berries, or maybe a half-roasted squirrel. If not, it might be grubs or termites. Yes, you read that right. Bugs. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled the stomach. Protein was tough to find, and often unreliable. But the foragers, usually women, older adults, and children, were the unsung heroes. They kept the group going when the hunt failed. So, that's how a caveman's day started. No frills, no time to waste, and every task was about survival. Whether it was food, fire, or tools, the focus was always on the essentials. Every move had to be efficient, or you didn't make it through the day. Now that the fire was crackling, and you'd managed to scrape together some food, the next priority was one of the most critical elements of Paleolithic life: tools. These were not just accessories or random objects. Tools were life. They could mean the difference between getting food and going hungry, between surviving an attack or becoming prey. The tool of the day was usually a flint or obsidian stone. If you were lucky enough to live near a volcanic area, you might even get your hands on some top-tier obsidian. Both were sharp and perfect for making spearheads, knives, scrapers, basically anything you could use to kill, butcher, or protect yourself. Creating these tools wasn't something you could rush through, though. It was all about trial and error. Sometimes, hours of work would go down the drain because a spearhead broke or a knife dulled too quickly. It was frustrating, to say the least. But the work didn't stop when the tools were made. Maintaining them was a daily task. If you didn't keep those edges sharp, they became useless. So, you'd spend a significant part of your day hammering rocks together, chiseling away at flint or obsidian, hoping you didn't smash your thumb in the process. And let's be real, it wasn't always glamorous. Some days it felt like you'd never get that perfect spearhead, and other times, after hours of labor, you might watch it snap with a single wrong move. Yet, despite the constant setbacks, you couldn't stop. Because losing your tools wasn't just annoying. It could be life-threatening. On top of making tools, another major part of Paleolithic life was hunting. Hunting wasn't just an individual endeavor. It was a full team effort. Imagine this. The hunt begins at dawn with everyone gathering around and preparing for the big day. But hunting large animals like mammoths, bison, and wild horses, that was a dangerous, high-stakes game. These animals were big, fast, and very protective. And if things went wrong, the consequences were immediate. One of the most crucial parts of hunting was tracking. Some people would go ahead of the group to scout out signs of movement or track animals. Others would prepare traps, hidden pits, or natural choke points near rivers. If you got lucky, you might even get an ambush. But it wasn't just a matter of throwing a spear and hoping for the best. There was a lot of strategy involved. You had to work as a team, make sure everyone was in sync, and then, when the moment came, throw yourself into the fray and hope everything went according to plan. And when it did, you might end up with a mammoth, or at least a bison. That was a huge win, not just for the group's survival, but for your personal reputation. The person who made the kill often got the first pick of the meat, a little extra respect, and maybe fewer chores for the night. But the catch, you had to share. Even if you killed the animal, everyone in the group had to eat. This wasn't about hoarding food. It was about maintaining the balance of the group. Meat wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol of status, of skill, and of survival. And then there were the smaller animals, deer, rabbits, birds, less risky but still a valuable resource. Here the approach was simpler: traps, spears, clubs. You weren't risking your life for these animals, but getting them still required skill and precision. The hunt was never easy, and sometimes, even after all that preparation, the group would return empty-handed, bruised, and frustrated. But the hunt wasn't the only game in town. For many in the Paleolithic world, foraging was just as important, if not more so. While some of the group was off risking their lives chasing mammoths, others were out looking for edible plants, berries, nuts, roots, and seeds. They didn't have the thrill of the chase, but they were just as essential to the tribe's survival. Foraging was often left to the women, children, and older adults, those who weren't as physically fit for a hunt, but still had vital roles to play. The foragers knew the land like the back of their hand. They understood which plants were edible and which ones could kill you. They had mental maps of the terrain and knew where to find the best resources. But their work wasn't without its dangers. Sometimes the foragers would find themselves in direct competition with animals, birds, squirrels, even bears, all hunting the same food. And let's not forget the bugs. A forager's day could quickly be ruined by a run-in with a wasp nest or a snake hiding under a berry bush. And foraging wasn't just about food. While they were out there, they would also collect firewood, medicinal herbs, and even materials for building shelters. Every trip was about multitasking. But the biggest reward came when the foragers brought back their haul to the group. They were the ones who fed the tribe when the hunters failed. And without them, everyone would go hungry. But what kept these people going? The ever-reliable fire. Fire wasn't just a luxury in the Paleolithic era. It was a lifeline. It kept you warm during the cold nights, cooked your food, and warded off dangerous animals. It was your beacon of light when darkness fell, and without it, survival was much harder. Keeping the fire alive wasn't just important. It was a matter of life and death. One person was usually designated as the firekeeper. This person had the crucial job of making sure the fire didn't go out. If the fire died, there were no matches to light it again. You'd have to start from scratch, using friction-based methods like rubbing sticks together or spinning them in dry wood, a process that could take hours if you didn't have the right materials. So the fire was vital. And if it went out, someone was going to be in trouble. The social aspect of the fire can't be overlooked either. The fire was the heart of Paleolithic social life. This wasn't just where food was prepared. It was where stories were shared, decisions were made, and relationships were built. After the day's work was done, everyone gathered around the fire to eat, talk, and unwind. Storytelling was huge. The older members of the group would share tales about the day's hunt, about spirits or ancestors, or perhaps about that one time someone tried to catch a fish by jumping in the river and, well, let's just say it didn't end well. And don't forget music. While there were no drum kits or guitars, someone would bang two stones together or hum a tune. And before you knew it, the kids would start spinning in circles, caught up in the rhythm of it all. All of this, hunting, foraging, fire, and socializing, was what made Paleolithic life manageable. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it worked. The Paleolithic people had their challenges, sure, but they were also resilient, adaptable, and incredibly resourceful. As the sun set and the day's work came to an end, Paleolithic humans would retreat to their shelters. And this is where we get a little glimpse into the more intimate side of their daily lives. In the Paleolithic era, there were no fancy homes or well-stocked closets, just simple shelters made from whatever was available. Whether it was a cave or a hut, shelter was one of the most important things that helped the early humans survive. Caves, when available, were obviously the ideal option. They provided natural protection from the elements and any would-be predators. But here's the catch. Caves weren't exactly private. More often than not, a cave would be shared by several groups, and with no personal space. Your neighbors probably weren't that far away. Think of it like living in a really cramped community. No walls, no locks on doors, and certainly no me time unless you ventured out into the wilderness, which, let's face it, wasn't always the safest choice. For those who didn't have caves, it was all about DIY shelter building. Imagine this. You've got a few mammoth ribs, some branches, animal hides, and whatever you can find to lash things together. You'd gather in teams, each person contributing their part, some holding sticks, others doing the tying. The result wasn't exactly architecturally stunning. In fact, it was more of a survival strategy than anything resembling modern construction. It was less about making things pretty, and more about keeping the rain out and keeping warm. And let's be honest, most of the time, the shelter was leaking. It was a constant struggle to keep the weather at bay, but despite the conditions, these shelters were enough. At the heart of the shelter was the fire. Always the fire. It was the one constant, the lifeline. And every night, someone had to check it. If the fire was too low, or if the wind shifted, that person's job was to stoke it back to life. And you know, there wasn't any glory in this job. It wasn't the kind of task that would get you a lot of praise. But if you forgot to check, it could mean disaster for everyone in the group. Then there was the matter of parenting in the Paleolithic era. Let's just say it wasn't a job for the faint of heart. There were no parenting manuals, no baby strollers, and definitely no mom groups to call for advice. When a child was born, you became responsible for keeping that little human alive and considering the environment. That was no small feat. Whether you had one child or several, they were your full-time responsibility. And for the mothers, breastfeeding was the norm for years. There was no formula, and solid food for toddlers wasn't exactly a priority. When a child wasn't eating, they were usually in some kind of trouble. It wasn't uncommon for them to wander too close to a cliff, or stick their hands into the fire. And when they did something dangerous, the lesson wasn't gentle. You didn't calmly explain why they shouldn't get too close to the edge. No, you grabbed them, yanked them back, and said something like, "No fall." You didn't have time for subtlety or slow learning. Parenting in the Paleolithic era was all about teaching survival skills on the fly. The children of these early humans were constantly learning through observation and repetition. Play, that was an essential part of their development. While the adults worked, kids were often out there playing with whatever they could get their hands on. Sticks, stones, and sometimes even bugs. There were no toys in the way we think of them today, but everything around them was a learning tool. A child who liked throwing rocks could grow up to be a great hunter. A kid who spent time watching the adults might one day become a shaman or healer. It wasn't about what you wanted to be. It was about what you had the skills for. By the time a child reached 10, they were expected to help out. This meant gathering firewood, fetching water, or scaring away birds from the drying meat. They weren't considered fully functional members of society yet, but they were on their way. No formal education, no schools, just life lessons learned through hands-on experience. It was all about survival, and you learned quickly or didn't last long. Now let's talk about the most iconic part of Paleolithic life, the fire. I mentioned it earlier, and it really cannot be overstated how central fire was to everything they did. It was the centerpiece of social life. After a long day of hunting, foraging, and dealing with the many challenges of the Paleolithic world, people would gather around the fire, not just to eat, but to unwind. This was their social time, their living room, if you will. But the conversations weren't about how great the weather was or what the latest gossip was in the tribe. Instead, people shared stories, tall tales about hunts, exaggerated accounts of bravery, and even legends about spirits and ancestors. Storytelling was how knowledge was passed down. It was how they preserved the past, taught lessons, and entertained one another. Music, too, was part of these gatherings. There were no orchestras or grand performances, but the people still found ways to make music. Two stones could become a drum, and someone might hum or chant. Before long, children were spinning in circles, caught up in the rhythm. It was all very unstructured, but it was the heart of Paleolithic culture. Now, let's not forget that relationships were part of this social life too. It wasn't all about work, fire, and stories. There was romance. But it wasn't the grand gestures we think of today. In fact, courtship in the Paleolithic era was often subtle. People didn't have dating apps, or even a clear idea of romantic relationships as we know them today. The relationship game was more about proximity. Who you sat next to, who you shared food with, who helped you out when you needed it. If you were interested in someone, you didn't give them a card or write a poem. No, you shared food with them, helped them with a task, or spent a little extra time around the fire. Relationships weren't about showing off. They were about survival and shared responsibilities. And if things weren't working out, it wasn't about a messy breakup. People just started to do fewer things together, and the relationship naturally cooled off. So, the day in the Paleolithic world wasn't all hunting mammoths and crafting tools. It was about community, survival, and family. It was a life that required constant effort, but somehow it worked. It wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, but it was essential for keeping the tribe alive and thriving. As the day wound down in the Paleolithic era, one might assume the people were simply exhausted from the constant work. But there was still something uniquely human that set them apart: creativity. Yes, despite all the struggles of survival, early humans still found time to create art. It wasn't in the form of grand sculptures or paintings we think of today, but rather, they used their environment, cave walls, stones, and bones to express themselves. The first known cave paintings date back over 30,000 years. Can you imagine that? The ancient people of places like Lascaux and Chauvet were creating art at a time when their basic survival was a daily struggle. They didn't have galleries, no formal education in art, yet they took the time to depict the animals around them: bison, mammoths, deer, all with surprisingly accurate details. Some of these paintings even captured the movement of animals, as if the artist wanted to show not just the animal's form, but its life and action. This wasn't just decoration. Some anthropologists believe these paintings were part of hunting rituals, meant to bring success in the hunt, or to pass on knowledge about animals, like a form of storytelling. The tools they used to make these paintings were simple: charcoal, ochre, and crushed minerals mixed with water, fat, or even saliva. They didn't have fine brushes, but they had their fingers, sticks, or hollow bones for spraying pigment. Yes, they were airbrushing thousands of years before we even knew what that was. The motivation behind these paintings is still debated, whether it was spiritual, a way to communicate with the gods, or just a way for early humans to leave their mark on the world. Whatever the reason, it shows that even in their harsh world, humans needed more than food and shelter. They needed to create. They needed to leave something behind. But of course, life in the Paleolithic era wasn't just about art or survival. It was also about illness. And let me tell you, getting sick or injured back then, that was a gamble with your life. No hospitals, no medicine cabinets, no emergency rooms. If you broke your leg, had a deep cut, or developed an infection, your options were limited. The best-case scenario, the injury healed naturally. But the worst-case scenario, well, it was often an early death. Primitive medicine did exist, though it was rudimentary at best. Early humans had a basic understanding of which plants could alleviate pain or inflammation. Willow bark, for instance, contains salicylic acid, the same compound found in aspirin. They likely chewed on it to relieve aches. For other injuries, people cleaned wounds with water, applied moss or animal hide to cover the area, and hoped for the best. But the real danger lay in infections. If a wound got infected and wasn't treated, it could quickly lead to death. something that early humans understood all too well. Then there were tooth problems. With a diet consisting mainly of tough meat, grains, and gritty plants, tooth wear was inevitable. Cavities weren't common, mainly because sugar and processed foods were not a part of their diet. But tooth decay and jaw infections did happen. And when they did, the solution wasn't pretty. If a tooth was causing trouble, it was probably pulled out with a rock. No anesthesia, no sterile tools, just raw survival. But despite all these challenges, humans were resilient. The evidence of healed fractures in Paleolithic skeletons shows that early humans had some form of care and treatment. Though the methods were basic, people did their best to help each other out, knowing that survival depended on it. Now, let's talk about something that might sound a bit more familiar. Shelter. You might think that Paleolithic people lived in caves and huts, and that was it. But they were actually more creative than you might expect. The fact is, not everyone had access to caves, and those who did often had to share with other groups. So, for many, building shelters from the available resources was essential. They used wood, bones, grasses, and animal hides to create something that at least kept the elements out. Building a shelter wasn't easy. It wasn't like today where we have tools, blueprints, and modern construction materials. No, Paleolithic shelter construction was more about trial and error. Branches were lashed together with animal sinew or vines. Sometimes, the shelter was so poorly put together that it would collapse halfway through. But that wasn't a reason to quit. They'd just get back to it and try again, using whatever was available. Even though these shelters were crude, they served their purpose. They kept people warm, protected them from the elements, and offered a place to sleep safely from predators. Fire, of course, stayed in the center, offering both warmth and light. It was in these shelters that families, sometimes extended families, lived, ate, and worked together. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something just as essential as the fire: travel. You might assume that people stayed in one place all the time. But the reality is, early humans were highly mobile. Their world was vast and filled with different ecosystems, so moving camp was often necessary. Whether it was for following game, avoiding danger, or just looking for new resources, Paleolithic groups were always on the move. Travel wasn't like it is today. There were no roads, no vehicles, and certainly no GPS. People used their feet to cover ground, sometimes traveling for days or even weeks. And there were no suitcases or backpacks. Everything had to be carried: tools, food, fire-starting materials, and of course, children. They didn't have fancy camping gear or even proper tents, just bags made from animal hides or woven baskets. But here's where it gets interesting. Navigating the landscape was a skill. Early humans didn't have maps or compasses. Instead, they used memory, landmarks, and oral knowledge to find their way. The mountain that looked like a sleeping bear, or the bend in the river that smelled funny, these were the markers that guided their path. And when a group traveled together, they moved in a line, carefully watching out for each other and adjusting their pace depending on the terrain and the weather. The weather, by the way, was always a huge factor. If it started to rain, or if the wind picked up, they needed to find shelter fast. There was no plan B. Everything depended on staying together, keeping the fire alive, and moving forward. But travel wasn't just about survival. It was also about community. When people moved together, they learned together. Stories, knowledge, and skills were passed down from generation to generation. Children learned how to forage, hunt, and protect themselves simply by watching the adults. And as they traveled, they continued to share, support, and build a stronger bond within the group. Now that the day's work is winding down, and the hunt is over, or the lack of one has been silently acknowledged, the group comes together to prepare for the most crucial part of Paleolithic life: the night around the fire. This was the moment of the day when survival switched gears from the raw energy of hunting and gathering to something more reflective, a time for bonding, learning, and decompressing. The fire was the center of it all. In fact, it could be said that the fire was more than just a source of warmth and light. It was a social and cultural hub. The group would sit around it, gathering close together. This wasn't just a place to eat. This was where everything happened. The fire was the group's living room, the place where conversations and stories flowed freely. But let's be real. These weren't the kinds of conversations you'd have around a modern dinner table. There was no, "How was your day?" or idle gossip about the latest drama. Instead, conversations often revolved around survival, experiences from the day, and, most importantly, stories. Storytelling was a central part of Paleolithic culture. It wasn't just about keeping kids entertained or passing the time. These stories were a way of preserving knowledge, sharing lessons about which animals to hunt, which plants were safe to eat, and what to avoid. And these weren't the calm, thoughtful tales we might share today. No, these were dramatic, exaggerated accounts, often filled with wild gestures, grunts, and maybe a few too many details about how that hunt went down. The stories helped to strengthen the bond within the group, making sure everyone knew their role and their place in the tribe. If you didn't contribute to the hunt, maybe you contributed with a story. Maybe you had an epic tale about the time you nearly caught that mammoth, or the time you definitely outran a wild boar. Of course, the kids loved the stories too. Their attention would be glued to the adults, wide-eyed and eager to hear about the great hunts or, even better, the mystical creatures and spirits that supposedly roamed the wilderness. And it was here, around the fire, where children learned their survival skills, through listening, observing, and, if they were lucky, participating in small tasks like fetching water or gathering wood. But the storytelling wasn't the only thing that kept the Paleolithic community alive during the night. Music, too, had a place around the fire. Now, don't picture a finely tuned orchestra. This wasn't some kind of cozy campfire song scenario. No, it was more about rhythm, simplicity, and human connection. Two stones might be tapped together to create a basic drum beat. A humming or chanting might join in. And before long, the kids, filled with energy, would be spinning around in circles, their movements following the rhythm of the group. Music wasn't just for fun. It helped reinforce group identity, kept the spirits up, and connected people to something bigger than themselves. Music was as much about survival as it was about entertainment. It was another form of communication, an expression of joy, stress, or triumph, depending on the situation. When you're living in an environment where every day could be your last, sometimes even the simplest sounds can lift the soul. As the evening went on, the group would settle into the final phase of the day: rest. The Paleolithic night was a much-needed reprieve from the constant hustle of survival. After all, tomorrow would bring more hunting, foraging, and tool-making. But rest wasn't as easy as it sounds. You didn't have comfy beds or quiet rooms to sleep in. No, most people lay down on animal skins or on the hard-packed earth. Their shelter might have kept the rain off, but it didn't keep out the cold or the discomfort. Privacy, forget about it. Everyone slept in tight quarters, often in a group with close family members, sometimes with other members of the tribe. Your body might be exhausted from the day's physical work, but your mind, it had to adapt to the constant sounds of others sleeping or waking up throughout the night. And while people were sleeping, they weren't exactly dreaming of fields of flowers. They were alert, always listening for the sounds of predators or other dangers. Even in sleep, your body was on high alert. If you woke up with the fire still burning and the group intact, you were already a step ahead. If the fire went out overnight, that's when panic set in. Sleep wasn't just a personal affair. It was a communal responsibility. The person on fire duty had to stay alert, ensuring that the flame didn't die out. And trust me, this wasn't a glamorous job. There was no recognition for keeping the fire alive, only the quiet sigh of relief when morning came, and everyone realized they weren't frozen to death. When the fire stayed alive, it kept the group safe. When it died, it meant danger, and possibly disaster. So, in a way, the fire wasn't just a light source. It was the group's lifeline. Everyone knew it. Everyone respected it. And this was the night for a Paleolithic human. It wasn't about winding down after a long day of hard work and socializing. It was about survival. Every moment, every task, every interaction served a purpose. The goal was always the same: stay alive, stay together, and make it to the next day. This wasn't a time of deep reflection or long nights of peaceful sleep. It was about waking up the next morning, getting to work, and hoping your group made it through another day. But even within this struggle for survival, there was beauty. There were moments of creativity, of connection, of music and laughter. And as the fire burned into the night, Paleolithic humans knew that even in their harsh world, they had something that made them different from the rest of the creatures they shared the land with. They had each other. And together, they would face the wild world that lay beyond the firelight, ready to survive whatever came their way. So, as we sit around this metaphorical fire with our Paleolithic ancestors, we can see just how tightly woven their lives were with their environment and the people around them. But the big takeaway here is how deeply interconnected everything was. They didn't just live in isolation. Their entire existence was about community, cooperation, and the constant push to survive in a harsh and unforgiving world. It wasn't glamorous, but it was life. And when you think about it, the struggle for survival and the strength of human bonds in the Paleolithic era laid the foundation for everything that followed. But let's take a moment to talk about something we haven't quite hit yet: the sheer resilience of early humans. Despite all the challenges they faced, harsh winters, dangerous predators, food shortages, and the constant struggle to stay warm or find shelter, early humans were incredibly resourceful. Their survival wasn't based on luck. It was based on innovation, determination, and a shared understanding of what it took to keep the tribe alive. What we often overlook in the grand history of human development is how much trial and error went into survival during those early years. Tools, for instance, weren't just picked up and used. Each tool required time and refinement. Crafting the perfect spear or knife wasn't a quick task. It took patience, skill, and the willingness to try and fail repeatedly. The raw materials were finite, and if you didn't get it right the first time, you had to start over. There was no back to the hardware store for more flint. But it wasn't just tools that required refining. It was the methods of hunting, gathering, and even fire making. Over time, humans learned how to adapt and improve. Take hunting for large game like mammoths. This wasn't just about spearing a mammoth and bringing it home. It was about planning, about understanding the environment and the animals. They knew where the herds migrated, when they would be most vulnerable, and how to approach them without getting trampled. Over generations, the group learned, honed, and passed down knowledge. Foraging, too, wasn't just a random process. Over time, people learned to recognize the best spots to find edible plants, nuts, and fruits. They figured out what to avoid and how to tell if a plant was poisonous. The danger wasn't just in the animals. It was in the very earth beneath their feet. One wrong bite could end your life, but this knowledge, passed down and shared by the community, became essential. It's these small but critical decisions that ensured the group survived. And this is where we start to see a shift in human development. What makes humans stand out, even from other successful species, is our ability to adapt, to learn from experience, and to share that knowledge with others. This is how the early humans survived. Not just as individuals, but as a tribe. Knowledge was the real weapon, and it was passed down orally through stories, songs, and shared experiences. Speaking of stories, it's important to recognize that these early humans didn't just need physical survival. They also needed emotional and social connection. The fire was more than just a heat source. It was a place where humans connected, shared stories, and reinforced the bonds that kept the group strong. Life was tough, but by gathering around the fire, they built something more: community. These social bonds were vital for survival. You couldn't survive alone in such a harsh world. If you got separated from the group, your chances of survival plummeted. The group was everything. It was protection, it was knowledge, and it was a source of emotional support. And as much as their world was driven by survival, it also required compassion, empathy, and shared responsibility. Let's take a moment to think about the role of the family. Family structures in Paleolithic times were simple, but they were crucial. It was the family that worked together to gather food, hunt, and build shelter. The survival of each individual was linked to the survival of the whole group. When the family worked together, parents, children, and extended family, it strengthened the entire group. Parents didn't just pass on their genetic material. They passed on the knowledge of how to live in a difficult world. They taught survival skills, but also emotional resilience, how to deal with failure, and how to keep going even when things seemed impossible. While parenting back then was certainly more about keeping the kids safe and alive, it was also about raising the next generation of survivors. Children learned early what was dangerous and what was safe. They learned that survival wasn't guaranteed, but that strength came from working with others. By the time they were 10 or so, they had already taken on important tasks: gathering wood, fetching water, or even helping with the hunt. There was no childhood to speak of in the way we think of it today. There was only preparation for the harsh realities of life. But this early exposure to survival was a gift. It meant that kids grew up understanding their role in the tribe and the importance of contributing to the whole. And even though Paleolithic life was all about survival, there was still room for pleasure. Music, storytelling, and even the occasional playful spinning around the fire helped balance out the stress of daily life. These moments were essential, not just for emotional well-being, but for reinforcing social bonds. When the world outside the fire was dangerous and unpredictable, it was the fire and the people around it that provided the stability, comfort, and connection necessary to carry on. Of course, this balance didn't last forever. As humans evolved, things changed. But the core principles that kept the Paleolithic humans alive, the importance of community, the need for knowledge, and the deep connection between family and tribe, remained constant throughout human history. They laid the groundwork for everything that followed, from the agricultural revolution to the rise of complex societies. So, what can we take away from this glimpse into the past? The Paleolithic era was brutal, yes, but it was also a time of incredible resilience, creativity, and cooperation. Humans didn't just survive. They adapted, learned, and passed on the knowledge that would help future generations thrive. And while we may not live in caves or hunt mammoths anymore, those same qualities, community, knowledge, and survival, still define who we are as a species. As we explore more of the Paleolithic world, it's fascinating to see just how much innovation was happening, even in an era that might seem rudimentary by our modern standards. The truth is, Paleolithic humans were innovators in their own right. Everything they did, whether it was crafting tools, creating shelter, or learning how to navigate the wild, was about improving their chances of survival in a world full of danger. One of the most important inventions of the time was the development of tools. Tools weren't just simple objects. They were the foundation for everything else. A good tool could mean a successful hunt, the ability to protect yourself from predators, or the ability to process the hides of animals for clothing and shelter. Without tools, survival was nearly impossible. And yet, it wasn't just about the tools themselves. It was about how those tools were created and refined. For thousands of years, humans experimented with different materials and techniques to craft the perfect spear or knife. Flint was the go-to material because it was sharp and easy to shape, but getting the right edge took patience and skill. The early humans had to learn from their mistakes, as tools often broke, chipped, or didn't work as expected. But they didn't stop. They kept refining their methods until they got it right. It wasn't just about survival. Every time they perfected a tool, or figured out a better way to hunt or gather, they were setting the stage for future innovations. These early tools laid the groundwork for more complex technologies in later periods, and they demonstrated the human ability to adapt and problem solve. But Paleolithic innovation didn't stop with tools. One of the most impressive feats of survival was the ability to create and maintain fire. Fire wasn't just an afterthought. It was central to everything. It was the tool that allowed humans to cook food, stay warm during freezing nights, and protect themselves from dangerous animals. And yet, starting and maintaining fire was an art. It wasn't about simply striking a match. It involved learning how to use friction-based tools, like rubbing sticks together to create an ember. It was a skill that required patience, experience, and a deep understanding of the materials around them. Imagine the process. The materials had to be dry, the sticks had to be the right kind of wood, and the fire starter had to have just the right technique. If one thing went wrong, you could end up wasting hours and still end up with nothing but a pile of ashes. But this ability to maintain fire was critical to the group's survival. If the fire went out during a cold night, everyone would suffer. So each person took turns ensuring the fire was kept alive, feeding it with wood, adjusting it, and always being vigilant. In this way, fire became a symbol of early human ingenuity. It wasn't just about surviving. Humans were learning how to harness and control the elements. This was a precursor to the many technological advancements that would follow, from the discovery of agriculture to the Industrial Revolution. As the days passed, the Paleolithic humans didn't just survive. They evolved. They adapted to their environments. And as they did, they created new ways of doing things. This process of adaptation didn't just apply to survival skills. It also applied to the way they interacted with the world around them. They began to develop a deeper understanding of the seasons, the animals they hunted, and the plants they foraged. They knew when certain berries were ripe, where to find the best water sources, and how to track the herds of large game. But beyond the practical knowledge, Paleolithic humans also began to develop something more profound: culture. They may not have had the written language or formal education we think of today, but they had oral traditions. They passed down stories, beliefs, and wisdom through generations. These stories weren't just for entertainment. They were survival tools. They taught the younger members of the tribe what to do and what not to do, and they provided a sense of identity and continuity. Paleolithic art, whether it was the intricate cave paintings or the carvings on bones and tools, was another form of cultural expression. It wasn't just about decoration. It was a way to communicate with the world, with the spirits, or even with the past. These images captured moments in time: animals on the hunt, handprints left behind on cave walls, and symbols whose meaning we still don't fully understand. What's remarkable about these early forms of art is that they weren't created for personal gain or to make money. They were created for something deeper: connection, identity, and the need to leave a mark on the world. As humans began to evolve and adapt, their communities became more complex. Groups grew larger, and with larger groups came the need for more sophisticated ways of organizing. Social structures began to form, even in these early societies. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about maintaining order, sharing resources, and ensuring that everyone had a role to play. Of course, this shift didn't happen overnight. It took time, and it wasn't always smooth. Early humans still faced challenges: predators, illness, and natural disasters. But over time, they found ways to manage these challenges. And as they did, they started to build the foundations for the more complex societies that would emerge in the future. This process of evolution and adaptation wasn't just physical, it was mental. Early humans began to understand the world in a way that allowed them to shape it to their needs. They learned to use the environment rather than just survive in it. They became problem solvers, innovators, and creators. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were beginning to shape their future. So, as we look back at the Paleolithic era, we can see that it was a time of intense struggle and hardship. But it was also a time of great innovation, creativity, and adaptation. The tools, the fire, the social bonds, and the art, they were all part of the same story. A story of survival, yes, but also of growth and change. And as we reflect on that, we can recognize that the foundation for everything that came after, the rise of civilizations, the development of technology, and the evolution of human society, was built during these early years. As we look further into the Paleolithic world, it's impossible not to see how much the early human experience shaped the trajectory of everything that followed. The Paleolithic era may seem distant, but its echoes are still felt in the very fabric of modern life. From the basic survival tactics to the first seeds of culture and societal structures, this period laid the groundwork for the rise of agriculture, civilization, and the complexities of human society. The early humans, through their persistent drive for survival, began to lay down the foundations of what we consider the essential elements of society today. But this wasn't a conscious effort. It was the result of generations of humans making decisions based on their immediate needs. And yet, those decisions gradually accumulated into a culture, a way of life that would, over millennia, evolve into something far more complex. One of the most significant steps in human evolution during the Paleolithic period was the development of more sophisticated social structures. As humans began to live in larger groups, cooperation became even more crucial. The success of the group was now directly tied to how well individuals could work together. And in such an environment, roles and responsibilities started to be defined more clearly. The idea of leadership likely emerged at this time. The hunters, who risked their lives chasing down large game, probably earned a form of respect or authority within the group. In contrast, the foragers, who provided food without the risk of being trampled by a mammoth, also became key figures. But it wasn't all about physical strength. The ability to craft tools or maintain the fire was also highly valued. These roles, though informal, created a kind of division of labor that helped sustain the group as a whole. But with the rise of social complexity came the first inklings of inequality. It's likely that, as communities grew, the roles of the most skilled or strongest individuals began to be elevated. The best hunters, toolmakers, or firekeepers likely gained more influence, possibly even a larger share of resources. This shift was subtle, but it marked a turning point, the very first hints of social stratification. Yet, even with these emerging hierarchies, early humans continued to work together in ways that supported the entire group. It wasn't every person for themselves. Sharing was still the bedrock of survival. The Paleolithic world didn't have concepts of property in the way we understand them today. Yes, there was ownership of tools, personal belongings, and even food. But the communal nature of early human life was vital. Food wasn't hoarded. It was shared. Those who contributed, whether by hunting or foraging, played a crucial part in the survival of the group. And this idea of community wasn't limited to physical survival. It extended into the emotional and cultural realms. The Paleolithic people lived in tight-knit groups, where emotional bonds were as important as physical ones. When someone got injured, the group cared for them. When someone was ill, they tended to them. This care wasn't just practical, it was emotional. It spoke to the deep, inherent understanding that the survival of the group relied not just on the physical strength of its members, but on their ability to care for one another. It was around the fire, in the warmth of community, that the concept of home was born. Sure, it wasn't a cozy couch or a coffee table, but it was a place of safety, warmth, and connection. The fire was the symbol of the tribe's unity. And when they gathered around it, it wasn't just to stay warm. It was to reaffirm their place in the world, their shared purpose, and the unspoken promise that together they would endure. Now, when you think of the Paleolithic era, it's easy to imagine a world of unrelenting struggle, dangerous animals, harsh winters, and food shortages. But in between all of that, there were moments of profound human connection. Around the fire, these early humans were not just surviving. They were thriving in their own way. They were telling stories, sharing laughter, and bonding with one another. They were learning, adapting, and, most importantly, evolving. This ability to evolve and adapt wasn't just about physical survival. It was about the development of the mind. The Paleolithic people had a rudimentary understanding of their world, but over time, they developed a much deeper awareness of their environment. They learned how to read the signs of nature, how to track animals, how to predict the weather, how to navigate by the stars. And it wasn't just survival knowledge that they passed down. It was cultural knowledge. The stories they told weren't just entertainment. They were an early form of education, helping the younger members of the group understand the world they lived in and teaching them how to survive in it. The importance of art, music, and storytelling can't be overstated. These early humans didn't have schools or libraries, but they did have oral traditions. Stories passed down from generation to generation became the foundation of their culture. And in the same way that art on cave walls captured their lives, these stories helped them understand who they were and where they came from. They didn't need written language. They had memories, and they had each other. And when it comes to art, the Paleolithic people were true pioneers. Their cave paintings and carvings weren't just decorative. They were an expression of their worldview, their spirituality, and their understanding of the natural world. The animals they painted weren't just creatures they hunted. They were symbols, representations of the power and mystery of the world around them. By depicting these animals on cave walls, early humans were not only recording what they saw, they were engaging with it, forming a connection with the animals, and perhaps even attempting to influence the outcome of their hunts. In this sense, Paleolithic art was both functional and spiritual. It wasn't just about expressing beauty or documenting the world. It was about interacting with it. Art became a tool for understanding, for interpreting the mysteries of life, and for securing the survival of the tribe. The way early humans interacted with their environment, through art, storytelling, and communal bonds, was the first step in humanity's journey from mere survival to the creation of culture. It was from these humble beginnings that the first civilizations would eventually emerge. But to get there, humans would need to continue evolving, adapting, and finding new ways to solve the problems that faced them. And they did. Over time, these early humans moved from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic, and eventually to the Neolithic, where they would lay the groundwork for agriculture, permanent settlements, and the birth of cities. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's remember that the Paleolithic world wasn't just about struggling to stay alive. It was about the birth of everything that came after. The bonds of community, the development of language, art, and culture, and the ability to adapt to an ever-changing world set the stage for human civilization as we know it. As we move forward in time, we come to one of the most pivotal moments in human history: the transition from the Paleolithic era to the Neolithic. This shift was nothing short of revolutionary. For thousands of years, humans had been nomadic, constantly on the move in search of food, shelter, and safety. But with the rise of agriculture, things began to change. The very way humans lived, worked, and interacted with their environment was transformed. In the Paleolithic era, survival was a constant, pressing issue. Hunting, gathering, and protecting the group from external threats defined the daily life. But as humans began to understand the cycles of nature more deeply, something remarkable happened. They learned to shape the environment around them. Instead of constantly moving with the seasons or chasing after wild animals, Humans began to domesticate plants and animals. They planted crops and raised livestock. And suddenly, the very nature of human existence began to shift. But let's be clear, this transition didn't happen overnight. The Neolithic Revolution, as it's called, unfolded over thousands of years. And it wasn't as simple as just planting a few seeds and watching them grow. Early humans didn't know exactly what they were doing. They didn't have modern farming tools, irrigation systems, or a deep understanding of plant biology. But they had something equally powerful: observation, experimentation, and patience. This new approach to food production, called agriculture, allowed humans to settle in one place. Instead of constantly following herds of animals or moving from place to forage, humans began to create permanent settlements. This shift was not only about food. It was about a fundamental change in how people related to the world. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to control their environment. And with this control came the ability to build stable communities. But agriculture didn't just change where people lived. It changed how they lived. No longer did everyone need to be involved in hunting or gathering. As some people focused on cultivating crops, others took on new roles, like crafting tools, building shelters, and later, developing new forms of technology. With the division of labor came the first real sense of specialization. And this, in turn, led to the rise of more complex societies. As people began to stay in one place, they began to develop systems for organizing their communities. Early forms of governance began to emerge, and with it, the need for laws, rituals, and social structures. There was now time for more than just survival. There was time for innovation, culture, and even leisure. People could now invest in things beyond their immediate needs, like building permanent homes, creating art, and refining social norms. The shift to an agricultural society also brought about a change in the size of human populations. With more reliable food sources, populations grew, and with population growth came competition. In the Paleolithic world, competition for resources like food and shelter was fierce. But in the Neolithic world, competition became more complex. Groups now had something to protect: their land, their crops, their livestock, and their way of life. This led to the first real conflicts between communities. With the rise of agriculture came the rise of warfare, as groups fought to protect their newfound resources. But it wasn't all about conflict. The Neolithic Revolution also brought about some of the most important advancements in human civilization. The development of pottery allowed humans to store surplus food, which was critical for times of scarcity. The creation of textiles led to more advanced clothing, and, eventually, the ability to trade goods with other communities. Metalworking emerged, and people began to craft tools that were stronger, more efficient, and longer lasting. And let's not forget the most significant change of all: the rise of permanent settlements. No longer did people need to constantly pack up their belongings and move on. They built homes that were more durable and weather-resistant. And over time, these small settlements grew into villages and towns. These early towns became the first centers of trade, culture, and social organization. They were the birthplaces of cities, and eventually, civilizations. The shift to a settled agricultural life was a monumental change, but it wasn't without its drawbacks. Life in the Neolithic era was still hard. While people no longer had to worry about migrating for food, they now faced new challenges: diseases, population density, and the stresses of managing larger, more complex communities. The rise of agriculture also meant more intensive labor, and often less time for leisure or creativity. It wasn't the utopia some might imagine. It was still a struggle, but it was a different kind of struggle. However, the seeds for future progress had been planted. Agriculture allowed humans to produce more food than ever before, which meant more people could survive, thrive, and build upon the knowledge and skills of their ancestors. From these small farming communities, the first cities would emerge, and with them, new technologies, arts, and philosophies that would change the world forever. But agriculture wasn't the only factor that led to this monumental change. As humans settled in one place, they began to form deeper social bonds. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living together and building a life. The transition to agriculture allowed people to focus on things beyond food, things like building relationships, sharing ideas, and creating culture. In other words, humans had reached a point where survival was no longer the sole concern. The real work of civilization, the development of complex societies, art, culture, and technology, could now begin. Looking back, it's clear that the Paleolithic era was a critical time in human development. It was the foundation of everything that came after. The tools, the fire, the art, and the social bonds were all key ingredients that allowed early humans to survive and eventually thrive. And as they transitioned from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic, they set the stage for the rise of civilizations. From agriculture to permanent settlements, the Neolithic revolution changed everything. But it wasn't just a shift in how humans obtained food. It was a shift in how they thought about their world. It was the beginning of human creativity, innovation, and cooperation on a scale never before seen. And it all started with the drive to survive. The transition from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic wasn't just a shift in lifestyle. It marked the beginning of something much more profound, the birth of civilization itself. With agriculture as the cornerstone, humans began to settle in one place, build permanent homes, and lay the foundations for complex societies. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where humans would begin to move beyond survival and into the realm of culture, governance, and the arts. As humans began to settle, life took on a different rhythm. There was no longer the constant movement and uncertainty of nomadic life. Instead, communities became centered around agriculture. People planted crops, raised livestock, and began to cultivate the land on a much larger scale than before. The land they worked became their home, and over time, this sense of place began to shape not only their daily lives, but their worldview. One of the first things that changed with the rise of agriculture was the population. As communities learned to grow and store food, they were able to support larger populations. This shift led to the rise of villages, towns, and eventually, cities. These early settlements were the first glimpses of what would become complex urban centers. But just as with anything in the Neolithic era, the growth of these early settlements wasn't without its challenges. The density of the population created new problems: sanitation, disease, and the need for more organized systems of governance. These were problems that early humans hadn't had to face in their nomadic lives. Back then, they could move when things got tough, but now they had to adapt to a more permanent lifestyle. And this shift in lifestyle led to the development of the first forms of government. As people began to settle into permanent homes and communities, the need for organization became apparent. The earliest forms of governance likely emerged from the need to manage resources, especially food. Who owned the land? Who had the right to harvest crops or use water sources? These were questions that couldn't be answered without some form of leadership. And, as we know, where there's leadership, there's often power. The earliest societies were likely governed by elders or leaders who were chosen based on their wisdom, experience, or physical prowess. These early leaders helped settle disputes, allocate resources, and make decisions for the good of the group. But as populations grew, leadership became more complex. It wasn't just about one person's wisdom or strength. It was about managing the needs of an entire community. This laid the groundwork for the more formalized systems of government that would emerge in the ancient civilizations to come. Along with governance came the development of laws. In the Paleolithic era, life was governed by the basic rules of survival: stay alive, protect your group, and ensure your tribe's continued existence. But in the Neolithic period, as communities grew and became more complex, There needed to be more specific guidelines for behavior. Disputes had to be settled, property had to be protected, and individuals had to be held accountable for their actions. The idea of laws, as we understand them today, was born out of this need to maintain order and fairness within growing communities. But government and law weren't the only developments that came with the rise of agriculture and permanent settlements. With more stable food supplies and growing populations, humans had the luxury of focusing on things beyond just survival. This was the dawn of human culture, the creation of art, music, religion, and technology. In these early settled communities, people began to develop the first forms of art. Pottery, textiles, and metalworking emerged as essential skills. Pottery was particularly important because it allowed people to store food and water, providing more security for the community. Textiles were used to make clothing, but they also played a key role in trade. People began to exchange goods, creating the first forms of commerce. And with commerce came specialization. No longer did everyone have to farm, hunt, or gather. Some people became skilled craftsmen, others traders, and some began to work with metals to create tools, jewelry, and weapons. Religion also began to take root in these early communities. As people settled into permanent homes, they developed a deeper understanding of the cycles of life, birth, death, and the changing seasons. Religion often centered around the worship of natural elements, like the sun, moon, and earth, which were seen as powerful forces that controlled the life cycles of crops and animals. Temples, shrines, and altars began to appear, and religious leaders emerged as important figures within society. But religion wasn't the only thing that flourished during this time. The arts, in the form of music, dance, and storytelling, also grew more sophisticated. These early humans, with their newfound stability, began to think beyond just surviving. They created myths and stories, passing them down from generation to generation. These stories told of gods, spirits, and ancestors, and they helped explain the world around them. They also provided a sense of identity, a way for people to understand their place in the world. As settlements grew and culture began to develop, people started to experiment with more advanced forms of technology. Agriculture had led to the invention of the plow, which made farming more efficient. The wheel was invented, changing transportation forever. And as people began to trade more goods, they needed a way to keep track of what was being exchanged. The earliest forms of writing likely emerged out of this need. It wasn't the written word as we know it today, but simple symbols and marks used to keep track of trade and resources. The Neolithic Revolution set the stage for the development of the first true civilizations. From the rivers of Mesopotamia to the Fertile Crescent of Egypt, early humans began to build the foundations of society, government, religion, trade, and culture, all born from the shift to settled agricultural life. But even as these great civilizations emerged, the fundamental lessons of the Paleolithic era remained. The survival of the group, the importance of cooperation, and the need to adapt and innovate were at the core of human progress. But as these early civilizations grew, so did their complexities. And with complexity came challenges. Governments became more formalized, economies grew more intricate, and societies became more stratified. The simple life of the Paleolithic era gave way to the political, social, and economic structures of the Neolithic and beyond. Yet, the foundations laid during the Paleolithic era, the ability to adapt, the focus on survival, and the importance of community, remained integral to the human experience. The Paleolithic era, once thought of as a primitive, brutish time, now stands as the birthplace of civilization. It was a time when humanity learned to live, adapt, and create. It wasn't just a time of survival. It was the beginning of everything we know about human culture, society, and civilization. And as we look back at these early years, we can trace the roots of every advancement, every cultural achievement, and every leap forward in human history back to the very first steps taken by those early Paleolithic humans. As the first Neolithic civilizations began to emerge, they sowed the seeds for everything that would follow: agriculture, urbanization, trade, art, and most significantly, the social and political structures that would define the next millennia of human history. These early innovations didn't just improve the lives of those who lived through them. They laid the foundation for the modern world as we know it today. The rise of the first cities marked the end of the Neolithic era and the beginning of a new age, the age of cities, trade, and the birth of complex societies. These early urban centers, such as Jericho in the Levant and Catalhoyuk in Anatolia, were a testament to the power of human ingenuity. What started as small farming villages slowly grew into bustling hubs of commerce, religion, and culture. The people who lived in these cities didn't just grow food. They began to specialize in different crafts and industries. Pottery, metallurgy, textiles, and even early forms of written language started to emerge as these cities became more sophisticated. But cities weren't just about the people living within them. They were centers of influence that extended far beyond their walls. Trade began to flow between these early cities, linking distant regions and creating the first long-distance trade networks. The movement of goods, ideas, and people accelerated in ways that were previously impossible. This laid the groundwork for the globalized world we live in today, where trade, culture, and knowledge can spread across continents in the blink of an eye. However, these advancements weren't just the result of a few lucky breakthroughs. They were the result of generations of hard work, experimentation, and innovation. And with the development of agriculture came a much deeper understanding of the world. Humans had finally gained some control over their environment. They could plant crops, breed animals, and construct permanent settlements. These activities allowed people to settle down, and for the first time in history, they could afford to think beyond just survival. Agriculture had given birth to permanent settlements, but these settlements, as they grew, also began to bring about new challenges. As the population swelled, so did the demand for resources. Land that was once plentiful began to be fought over. The need for water and food grew exponentially, and with it, the need for systems of organization and governance. This is where the true shift occurred. Humans moved from being survivors of nature to becoming controllers of it. One of the key components of this shift was the development of early governments. As cities grew, leaders emerged to manage the increasing complexities of urban life. The need to organize resources, manage trade, and settle disputes gave rise to the first forms of leadership, from tribal chiefs to city rulers. Over time, these leadership structures would evolve into the monarchies, republics, and empires that would come to dominate human history. Along with governance came laws. Early human societies began to realize the importance of maintaining order and ensuring fairness. The first known legal code, the Code of Ur-Nammu from ancient Sumer, was created in the 21st century BCE, and it laid out basic principles for justice and punishment. These early laws weren't as complex as modern legal systems, but they represented an important step toward creating organized, stable societies. But the Neolithic Revolution wasn't just about governance and laws. It was about cultural identity. As cities grew and societies became more complex, so did the ways in which people expressed their identity. Art, religion, and social rituals became more sophisticated, and this gave rise to the first major cultural movements. Temples, shrines, and statues began to appear as the divine, and the sacred became central to urban life. People didn't just worship in the open air or caves. They built monumental structures to honor their gods and mark the boundaries of their communities. These religious practices were a way to explain the world, to find meaning in life's mysteries, and to maintain social order. They also gave rise to the first forms of social stratification. Priests, religious leaders, and kings often had immense power, and their authority was bolstered by their claimed connection to the divine. This concept of divine kingship would later evolve into the dynasties and empires of the ancient world. The Neolithic Revolution also triggered advancements in communication. Writing, the most profound of human inventions, likely began as a means to record trade transactions. The earliest forms of writing, such as cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphs in Egypt, were born out of practical necessity. But over time, writing became a tool for documenting laws, telling stories, and recording history. The invention of writing allowed humans to transcend their immediate surroundings and communicate ideas, experiences, and knowledge across generations. This invention would eventually lead to the development of literature, science, and the preservation of cultural identities. As the world moved into the Bronze Age and beyond, the fruits of the Neolithic Revolution continued to ripen. The development of metallurgy enabled humans to make more durable tools, weapons, and buildings. The use of copper, bronze, and later iron sparked revolutions in technology and warfare. Early civilizations, like the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Harappans, would become some of the most influential cultures in human history. But it wasn't just the tools or the technology that changed. The very structure of society itself began to evolve. As early cities grew, so did the complexity of social relationships. There was a rise in class distinctions. Those with more wealth and power often controlled the resources, while those with fewer resources were forced into labor. This was the beginning of what we now call social stratification. The wealthy lived in grand homes, while the poor lived in simple dwellings, and the concept of wealth and power became central to the development of human civilizations. With the rise of cities, trade, and culture, the need for governance became even more important. Systems of law, administration, and military protection became vital to the survival of these civilizations. The rise of kings and rulers who could defend their people, manage resources, and enforce laws marked the beginning of organized states. These early empires, the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Indus Valley civilizations, laid the groundwork for everything that followed, from the rise of ancient Greece and Rome to the modern nation-states we know today. At the same time, the development of agriculture and settlement created new challenges. More people meant more demand for food and resources. This gave rise to the first social inequalities. There were the elites, the rulers, priests, and traders. And then there were the laborers, farmers, and slaves who provided the food and resources for everyone else. With the growth of trade, cities, and empires came the need for organized labor, markets, and legal systems. These systems became the backbone of ancient economies. But as civilizations grew, so did their ability to shape the environment around them. They built monumental structures like the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. They created systems of writing and mathematics that enabled them to keep track of resources, trade, and even the stars. They developed trade networks that connected far-flung regions, spreading ideas, technologies, and goods. And all of this, every step of the way, can be traced back to the Neolithic Revolution. It was in the dawn of agriculture, the rise of cities, and the development of complex social systems that humanity began to build the foundations of the world we live in today. As we move from the Neolithic period into the rise of the first great empires, it's clear that the Neolithic Revolution set in motion an unbroken chain of innovation and cultural evolution. The development of agriculture and the first permanent settlements didn't just mark the end of a hunting-gathering lifestyle. They marked the beginning of a new era, an era where cities, trade, technology, and eventually complex systems of government and culture became the defining features of human civilization. The earliest urban centers that emerged from the Neolithic settlements, such as Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, laid the groundwork for everything that would follow. But while these early cities were small by today's standards, they represented something far larger in the scope of human history: the transition from scattered tribes to organized urbanized societies. At the heart of this transition was the rise of organized government. The need to manage increasingly complex societies, where people no longer lived in small, egalitarian groups, but in cities with varying levels of wealth and power, gave rise to the first systems of governance. The idea of a centralized authority, a king, a council, or a bureaucracy, emerged as essential for maintaining order and stability. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, the Sumerians developed one of the first known legal codes, the Code of Ur-Nammu, which laid the foundation for more elaborate systems of law. The Egyptians, under the rule of the pharaohs, believed their leaders were divine figures, and their leadership was tied to both political power and spiritual authority. This fusion of the political and the divine became a defining feature of many ancient civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica. As these civilizations grew and developed, the role of religion continued to play a crucial part. Temples were not only places of worship, they were often the centers of power and learning. In the grand cities of Mesopotamia and Egypt, priests and rulers alike controlled the flow of knowledge, and religious institutions had a significant influence on everything from social structure to technological innovation. The development of writing was another pivotal moment that carried the legacy of the Neolithic Revolution forward. Writing allowed societies to record their history, maintain laws, manage trade, and preserve cultural identity. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform was used to keep track of trade transactions and agricultural surpluses. The Egyptians developed hieroglyphics, and the Indus Valley people had their own system of writing, which, despite being undeciphered, points to the importance of record-keeping in early civilizations. Trade also flourished as the first cities connected with each other through complex trade networks. Raw materials, luxury goods, and cultural knowledge spread across vast distances, from the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China. This exchange of goods and ideas helped stimulate innovation in everything from metallurgy to mathematics, and trade itself became one of the driving forces behind the rise of cities and empires. The Bronze Age saw the emergence of more sophisticated technology, and with it, the ability to build more durable and complex structures. The development of bronze tools and weapons revolutionized agriculture, warfare, and craftsmanship. Bronze was not only more durable than stone, but also allowed for the creation of intricate works of art, tools, and even the first military armor. It was during this time that some of the most famous monuments in human history were constructed. The Egyptians built the pyramids, which not only served as tombs for their pharaohs, but also as symbols of their technological and organizational prowess. The Mesopotamians built ziggurats, vast stepped pyramids that served as temples to their gods, and also as symbols of their societal and religious power. These monumental structures were not just about grandeur. They were about expressing the values and beliefs of the civilization. And yet, even as these empires grew in power and sophistication, they faced internal challenges. The rise of social hierarchies, as societies became more stratified, created tension between the elites and the common people. Slavery, forced labor, and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few were features of many early civilizations. While religion and government were meant to provide order and stability, they often also reinforced inequality. Despite these challenges, early civilizations created the first legal, economic, and social systems that would influence every civilization that followed. The Sumerians, Egyptians, and later the Greeks and Romans laid the groundwork for modern concepts of law, democracy, and governance. The Greek philosophers introduced the idea of democracy, and the Roman Empire created legal codes that still influence modern legal systems. But the rise of these powerful civilizations wasn't just about governance and law. It was also about culture and identity. The arts flourished, from the music of ancient Egypt to the literature of Mesopotamia. The epic poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, is one of the oldest known works of literature, and tells the story of a king's search for immortality, reflecting the eternal human struggle with death and the quest for meaning. The Egyptians created a rich cultural tapestry, from their monumental architecture to their intricate jewelry and artwork. The Indus Valley Civilization, though we know little about their art and culture, left behind evidence of highly advanced urban planning, with cities like Mohenjo-Daro featuring sophisticated drainage systems, organized streets, and large public baths. And of course, in China, the Shang and Zhou dynasties laid the foundation for Chinese culture, with innovations in bronze casting, writing, and philosophical thought that would shape China for millennia. As these early civilizations continued to evolve, so too did their ability to manage large, complex societies. The role of agriculture in supporting these cities was undeniable. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about creating a surplus, something that could be stored, traded, or used to support a growing population. Agriculture became not only the backbone of early civilizations, but the engine that powered their economies and development. But even as these societies thrived, they eventually reached their limits. The growth of empires came with environmental, social, and political pressures. The rise of new technologies, including iron weapons and improved farming techniques, eventually helped new civilizations like the Greeks and Romans take shape. But those civilizations, too, would face their own crises. What began in the Neolithic era, agriculture, trade, government, and art, created the foundation for all that would come after. From the first cities to the sprawling empires of Rome and China, these ancient civilizations gave rise to the principles that would define the modern world. Though the specifics of their cultures may have faded, their innovations and ideas live on today, reminding us that the world we know was shaped by the legacy of those first pioneers. Those early humans who learned how to settle, how to create, and how to thrive. As we continue our journey through the evolution of human civilization, we now find ourselves in the midst of the rise of the great ancient empires that would define the classical era, particularly Greece and Rome. These civilizations not only influenced the course of human history, but they also laid the philosophical, cultural, and political foundations for the world we know today. Their ideas, their systems, and even their struggles continue to echo through the ages. The Greek civilization, particularly in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, marked a revolutionary shift in human thought. It wasn't just that they built great cities or developed impressive technologies. It was their approach to the world that set them apart. The Greeks were obsessed with the pursuit of knowledge. Philosophy, democracy, and rational thinking flourished in this environment. Thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle challenged the very nature of human existence, ethics, and the universe. Their work still shapes modern philosophy and ethics. At the heart of Greek society was the concept of democracy, a system of governance where citizens, albeit a small portion of the population, could participate directly in political decisions. This was a monumental shift from the authoritarian monarchies of earlier civilizations, and it laid the groundwork for the democratic systems we see today in many parts of the world. The city-state of Athens, in particular, became the birthplace of democracy, where free men gathered to discuss politics, philosophy, and society. But Greek civilization wasn't just about philosophy and politics. The Greeks also excelled in art, drama, and architecture. The iconic columns of Greek temples, the beauty of statues like the Venus de Milo, and the works of playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides have endured through the centuries. Greek drama, which explored the complexities of human nature and the gods, laid the foundation for Western theater, and their advances in sculpture and architecture set the standard for aesthetics for generations to come. However, Greece wasn't a unified empire. Instead, it was a collection of city-states, each with its own governance, culture, and identity. The most famous of these were Athens and Sparta, two cities that embodied very different values. Athens, with its focus on democracy, intellectual pursuits, and cultural development, and Sparta with its militaristic, disciplined approach to life. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta reached its zenith in the Peloponnesian War, which ultimately weakened Greece and set the stage for another rising power, the Macedonian Empire under Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's empire would stretch from Greece all the way to India, spreading Greek culture and ideas throughout much of the ancient world. The era known as the Hellenistic period saw the fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures, leading to advancements in science, medicine, and mathematics. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of learning and scholarship, and the Greek language became the lingua franca of much of the Mediterranean world. Alexander's empire, though short-lived, had a profound and lasting impact on the course of history, blending cultures and ideas that would influence the Roman Empire that came after. Which brings us to Rome, the civilization that would take Greek ideas and build something even larger. Rome's rise from a small city-state to one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen was nothing short of spectacular. Rome's story is one of military conquest, political innovation, and cultural assimilation. At its peak, the Roman Empire spanned from the British Isles to the deserts of North Africa, and from the Iberian Peninsula to the shores of the Middle East. One of Rome's most significant contributions to the modern world was its legal system. Roman law became the basis for much of modern legal practice, influencing systems of justice in countries around the world. The idea of codified laws, the rights of citizens, and the notion of legal representation were all born out of Roman governance. The Roman concept of civis Romanus sum, or I am a Roman citizen, became a symbol of equality and protection under the law, a principle that still resonates in many legal systems today. Rome's political structure also had a lasting influence. The Roman Republic, which existed before the rise of the Roman Empire, introduced ideas like the Senate, elected officials, and checks and balances, all concepts that would later influence the development of modern democracies. Even the Roman Empire, with its autocratic rule, was shaped by the institutional structures of the Republic, particularly the idea of governance by law and the role of the military in protecting the empire's borders. Rome's military might was another key to its success. Roman legions, trained in discipline and strategy, were one of the most effective fighting forces in history. The Roman military not only conquered vast territories, but also helped to secure and maintain the empire's borders for centuries. Roman engineering feats, like roads, aqueducts, and bridges, helped connect the vast empire and facilitate communication, trade, and military movements. But the Roman Empire wasn't just a military and political powerhouse. It was also a center of culture. The Romans borrowed heavily from Greek art, philosophy, and architecture, and they developed their own distinctive contributions. Roman architecture, with its use of arches, domes, and concrete, revolutionized building design. The Colosseum, the Roman Forum, and the Pantheon are just a few examples of the engineering marvels the Romans created, many of which still stand today. Rome also left a cultural legacy that extended far beyond its borders. Roman literature, philosophy, and theater were widely studied and adapted throughout the empire. Latin, the language of the Romans, would become the root of the Romance languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, and it continues to influence modern languages, particularly in legal, medical, and scientific terminology. However, Rome's dominance eventually began to decline. Internal political instability, economic troubles, and military overreach weakened the empire. The empire's vast size made it difficult to govern effectively, and its military, once the source of its strength, became increasingly overstretched. By the 5th century CE, the Western Roman Empire had collapsed under the pressure of barbarian invasions and internal divisions. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue to exist for nearly 1,000 years longer. But the fall of Rome marked the end of the classical age. Yet, even in its decline, Rome's legacy lived on. The ideas of Roman law, governance, engineering, and culture were carried forward by the Byzantine Empire, the medieval kingdoms of Europe, and eventually into the modern world. The Romans may have fallen, but their contributions to civilization remained. The rise of these ancient empires, Greece, Rome, and others, was not just about military conquest. It was about the spread of ideas, innovations, and culture. These civilizations didn't just build empires, they built the foundations of the modern world. Democracy, legal systems, architecture, literature, and even the very idea of citizenship and governance were all shaped by these ancient civilizations. As the Roman Empire fell, the world entered a period that is often referred to as the Middle Ages. This era, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, was marked by significant shifts in power, culture, and technology. It was a time of both great struggle and innovation, a time where humanity would endure invasions, plagues, and political instability, but also a time where new ideas began to flourish, setting the stage for the Renaissance and the modern world that would follow. The fall of Rome had left a power vacuum across Europe. The great cities and roads that once connected the empire were abandoned, and Europe was fragmented into various feudal kingdoms. The collapse of centralized authority led to the rise of local lords and barons, each ruling over small territories with little to no interference from a higher government. This decentralization created a new kind of social structure, the feudal system. Feudalism was based on land ownership and loyalty. Kings and nobles granted land to vassals in exchange for military service and other obligations. At the bottom of this hierarchy were the peasants and serfs, who worked the land in return for protection from their lords. Though the system created stability in a fragmented Europe, it also reinforced social inequality. The vast majority of the population was tied to the land and had little opportunity to rise above their social class. During this time, the Catholic Church played an incredibly important role. It provided spiritual guidance, education, and even a sense of stability in a world that often seemed chaotic. The Church was one of the few institutions that remained strong after the fall of the Roman Empire, and it became a central figure in medieval life. It wasn't just about religion, it was about everything. The Church controlled vast amounts of land, wealth, and power. It established monasteries where monks preserved knowledge, cared for the poor, and played a significant role in the early education system. These monasteries became centers of learning and scholarship, and many of the ancient texts from Greece and Rome were copied and saved by monks, preserving them for future generations. Despite the power and influence of the Church, the Middle Ages were also a time of struggle. The constant threat of invasions from the Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens kept many European kingdoms on edge. The feudal system was designed to protect people, but it also meant that life was uncertain, and survival was never guaranteed. Wars were common, and political alliances shifted rapidly. One of the most famous examples of this instability is the Hundred Years' War between England and France, which lasted from 1337 to 1453 and had a profound impact on both countries. At the same time, the plague, often referred to as the Black Death, swept through Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. The Black Death caused widespread devastation, wiping out a significant portion of Europe's population. The pandemic had a profound impact on society. It caused economic disruption, weakened feudalism, and even challenged traditional religious beliefs. The Church, which had been a source of comfort for many, couldn't explain why the plague had struck, leading some to question the power of religious institutions. However, it wasn't all darkness during the Middle Ages. Despite the turmoil, there were significant advancements, particularly in the fields of architecture, agriculture, and philosophy. The Gothic style of architecture, with its soaring cathedrals and intricate stained glass windows, became the hallmark of the period. These magnificent structures, like Notre Dame in Paris, showcased the craftsmanship and devotion of the people of the time. Meanwhile, agricultural innovations, such as the introduction of the three-field system and the plow, improved food production, helping to support growing populations. It was during the latter part of the Middle Ages that Europe began to experience a cultural awakening that would ultimately lead to the Renaissance. This was the beginning of a revival in interest in classical Greek and Roman ideas. Scholars and artists began to rediscover the works of ancient philosophers, scientists, and poets, and they began to question the traditional views of the world. This intellectual movement would lay the foundation for a cultural revolution that would change the course of history. One of the key developments during this time was the rise of universities. The University of Bologna, the University of Paris, and the University of Oxford were founded during the Middle Ages and became centers of learning. These institutions became breeding grounds for new ideas, and many of the thinkers who would later lead the Renaissance studied and taught at these universities. The Middle Ages, while often viewed as a dark and tumultuous time, were far more complex than that. They were a time of transformation, of both setbacks and progress. The fall of the Roman Empire had led to a fragmented Europe, but it had also paved the way for new systems of governance, new ideas about religion and power, and a deeper understanding of human potential. It was from this period of instability that the Renaissance would eventually emerge. The Renaissance, which began in Italy in the 14th century, was a rebirth of art, science, and culture that sought to revive the classical ideals of ancient Greece and Rome. It was a time of great innovation and discovery, where thinkers and artists pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The work of artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael revolutionized the world of art, while scientists like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler challenged the traditional views of the universe. The Renaissance marked a shift in how people thought about themselves and the world around them. It was a time when individuals began to focus on human potential, creativity, and exploration. This period of intellectual and cultural awakening set the stage for the modern world. The rise of the printing press, the rediscovery of ancient texts, and the spread of new ideas led to a cultural explosion that would change the course of history. The legacy of the Renaissance is still with us today. The ideas and discoveries that emerged from this period continue to shape the way we think about science, art, politics, and philosophy. The Renaissance was not just a revival of classical learning. It was a reimagining of what human beings could accomplish. And it was a direct response to the challenges of the Middle Ages, a time of both great adversity and incredible achievement. In the grand sweep of human history, the fall of Rome and the rise of the Middle Ages may seem like a dark period. But in reality, it was a time of transformation, of foundations being laid for the future. The story of the Middle Ages is a story of resilience, adaptation, and the constant striving for something better, a theme that runs through every stage of human history. The Renaissance may have been a cultural rebirth, but it was also the spark that ignited a period of profound global change. By the late 15th century, the world was on the brink of an age of discovery, one that would dramatically reshape the planet and humanity's place in it. This was the age of exploration, a time when European explorers set sail into unknown waters, spurred by the desire for wealth, adventure, and the thirst for knowledge. At the heart of this explosion of exploration was one of the most famous figures in history, Christopher Columbus. In 1492, Columbus, backed by Spain, embarked on a journey across the Atlantic, hoping to find a new route to Asia. Instead, he stumbled upon the Americas. Though Columbus's voyages were often celebrated as discoveries, it's crucial to remember that the Americas were already inhabited by indigenous peoples, with their own rich cultures, societies, and histories. The concept of discovery was more about connecting Europe to new lands and opportunities, which would lead to the eventual colonization of vast territories across the globe. Columbus's accidental landing in the New World set off a wave of exploration and colonization. Shortly after, Explorers like Vasco da Gama and Ferdinand Magellan embarked on voyages that charted new sea routes to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The age of exploration not only expanded geographical knowledge, but also introduced new ways of thinking about the world, bringing together different cultures, economies, and ideas in ways that had never been seen before. One of the most significant developments during this period was the expansion of trade routes. The discovery of the Americas opened up vast new markets for European powers, particularly Spain, Portugal, France, and England. The establishment of trade routes to the east and the west allowed for the exchange of goods, technologies, and knowledge on an unprecedented scale. The introduction of goods like spices, silks, and precious metals to Europe fueled the economy and spurred further exploration. But the impact of the age of exploration wasn't just economic. It was also cultural. The exchange of ideas, art, and philosophy between the Old World and the New was a powerful force. While many European powers sought to impose their beliefs and way of life upon the indigenous peoples they encountered, there was also a significant cultural exchange that enriched both sides. For example, the introduction of new crops like maize and potatoes from the Americas revolutionized agriculture in Europe. Conversely, European diseases like smallpox decimated native populations in the Americas, leading to a tragic loss of life and culture. In the midst of this global expansion, the Renaissance's intellectual ideas continued to spread. Humanism, the belief in the potential of humanity to shape its own destiny through reason and creativity, became a driving force behind the age of exploration. Scholars, artists, and scientists sought to expand their knowledge of the world, and this intellectual curiosity was embodied in the explorers who risked their lives to push beyond the known world. The age of exploration also gave rise to new technologies that made long-distance travel possible. Advances in shipbuilding, like the creation of the caravel, a small, fast ship capable of sailing against the wind, allowed explorers to travel further and more efficiently. The development of more accurate maps, navigational tools like the astrolabe, and the use of the compass transformed the way people navigated the seas, leading to the expansion of global trade networks. But while the age of exploration was a period of incredible discovery and innovation, it was also one of conflict and exploitation. The rise of colonial empires, particularly in the Americas, brought with it the oppression and subjugation of indigenous peoples. Colonizers often sought to exploit the resources of the lands they discovered, leading to the extraction of valuable minerals, the establishment of plantations, and the forced labor of enslaved Africans. This dark chapter in history would leave a legacy of inequality, injustice, and trauma that continues to impact the modern world. The exploration of the world's oceans also led to the first truly global empires. Spain and Portugal were among the first to establish vast overseas territories, with Spain claiming much of South and Central America, while Portugal focused on Brazil and parts of Africa and Asia. The English, French, and Dutch soon followed, establishing their own colonies and trade routes across the globe. The competition between these European powers for land, resources, and wealth set the stage for centuries of colonial wars, territorial disputes, and the shaping of the modern geopolitical landscape. Yet, despite the violence and exploitation, the age of exploration also opened up new ideas, cultures, and innovations. It connected continents in ways that had never been possible before. The knowledge of the world, its geography, its peoples, and its resources expanded dramatically. And this new global awareness laid the groundwork for the future rise of capitalism, the development of the modern global economy, and the interconnectedness that defines our world today. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the Renaissance's spirit of intellectual curiosity and discovery didn't fade with the advent of exploration. It continued to evolve. As explorers sailed into unknown waters, the world of science, art, and philosophy underwent a transformation. The Renaissance had already led to a revival of classical learning, but the scientific discoveries of the 16th and 17th centuries, such as those of Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler, laid the foundation for what we now call the scientific revolution. This revolution was a shift in thinking, a move away from the medieval view of the universe, where the Earth was at the center, and toward a new understanding of the cosmos, where the Earth was just one planet in a vast universe. The ideas of scientists like Copernicus, who proposed the heliocentric theory, and Galileo, who used telescopes to observe the heavens, challenged centuries of religious doctrine and traditional thought. These advancements paved the way for the Enlightenment, a period of intellectual and philosophical development that would further shape the modern world. The Renaissance and the Age of Exploration were intrinsically linked. The intellectual curiosity of the Renaissance gave rise to the explorers who mapped the world, and the discoveries made during the Age of Exploration fueled the intellectual debates of the Renaissance. Together, these two periods set the stage for the emergence of the modern world, an era marked by the growth of scientific knowledge, the development of new political systems, and the expansion of trade and culture across the globe. As we move into the modern era, the world is increasingly interconnected. The global trade networks that were first established during the Age of Exploration have only grown, and the ideas born out of the Renaissance continue to shape how we think about the world. From the development of democracy to the growth of technology, the impact of the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration is still felt today. In many ways, the world we live in now is the result of the intellectual and cultural revolutions of the past. The curiosity that sparked the Renaissance, the courage that drove explorers to sail into the unknown, and the scientific breakthroughs that followed all contributed to the world we now inhabit. A world where knowledge, discovery, and exploration continue to be at the heart of human progress. As the Age of Exploration opened up new frontiers across the globe, another transformative period began to take shape within Europe: the Enlightenment. Emerging in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Enlightenment was a cultural and intellectual movement that sought to apply reason, science, and empirical evidence to every aspect of human life. This was a time when ideas about government, society, and the natural world were questioned, challenged, and, in many cases, radically redefined. The Enlightenment thinkers, or philosophes as they were known in France, believed that human progress could be achieved through reason and education. They rejected the traditional authority of monarchs, the church, and feudal systems, advocating instead for systems based on equality, freedom, and rational governance. It was the beginning of a shift from absolute monarchy to the idea of governance by consent of the governed, a concept that would influence revolutionary movements across the globe. One of the key figures of the Enlightenment was the French philosopher Voltaire, who famously said, "I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Voltaire championed freedom of speech, the separation of church and state, and the importance of individual rights. His ideas, along with those of other Enlightenment thinkers like Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Locke, laid the intellectual foundation for modern democratic thought. John Locke's ideas, in particular, had a profound impact. Locke argued that individuals had natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and that governments were formed to protect these rights. If a government failed to protect these rights, Locke believed, the people had the right to overthrow it. These revolutionary ideas about the role of government and the rights of the individual would go on to inspire the American Revolution in the late 18th century, and later the French Revolution. The spread of Enlightenment ideas was greatly facilitated by the rise of print culture. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century had already revolutionized the way information was spread, but by the time of the Enlightenment, books, pamphlets, and newspapers were widely accessible. This allowed for the rapid dissemination of ideas and salons, gatherings where intellectuals and philosophers discussed ideas became popular across Europe. The result was a dramatic shift in the way people thought about politics, science, religion, and the human condition. While the Enlightenment was primarily an intellectual movement, its ideas had very practical consequences. The belief in reason and progress inspired not only political revolutions, but also scientific discoveries and social reforms. The scientific method, which emphasized observation, experimentation, and the testing of hypotheses, became the dominant way of understanding the natural world. Figures like Isaac Newton, whose work in physics and mathematics revolutionized the way we understood the universe, were central to the Enlightenment's legacy. Newton's laws of motion and gravity, for example, showed that the universe operated according to natural laws that could be understood through reason and observation, challenging the religious and superstitious explanations that had dominated for centuries. But it wasn't just the sciences that saw breakthroughs. The Enlightenment also paved the way for significant social and political reforms. The ideas of equality and liberty that had been championed by Enlightenment thinkers began to take root in political revolutions. The American Revolution, which culminated in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, was one of the first to put Enlightenment principles into action. The American colonists, inspired by ideas of individual rights and government by consent, rebelled against British rule, seeking to create a new nation based on these democratic ideals. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was another major event that was deeply influenced by Enlightenment thought. The French Revolution was a response to the absolute monarchy of King Louis XVI and the widespread inequality between the aristocracy and the common people. Revolutionaries like Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Danton believed that society could be restructured along the principles of equality, liberty, and fraternity. The French Revolution led to the abolition of the monarchy, the establishment of a republic, and, for a brief time, the rise of radical social reforms. But, of course, revolutions are rarely neat and clean, and the French Revolution quickly descended into chaos. The Reign of Terror, led by Robespierre, saw tens of thousands of people executed, and the dream of a democratic republic gave way to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who would eventually declare himself emperor. Despite the turmoil, the French Revolution left behind a legacy of democratic ideals that would influence future political movements, both in Europe and around the world. The Enlightenment, with its focus on reason, individual rights, and the rejection of absolute authority, didn't just influence political revolutions. It also laid the groundwork for modern education, economics, and social reforms. Philosophers like Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, championed the idea of free market capitalism, arguing that economies functioned best when left to operate without government interference. Smith's ideas would go on to shape the modern economic system, and his work remains foundational to capitalist thought today. As the Enlightenment took hold in Europe, it wasn't just the elite intellectuals who embraced these new ideas. The rise of the middle class, entrepreneurs, merchants, and professionals, who had benefited from the economic changes brought on by trade, industry, and the growth of cities, were also key proponents of Enlightenment thought. They saw the Enlightenment as a way to challenge the power of the aristocracy and the church, and they sought to create a society where merit, reason, and individual rights were prioritized over birthright and tradition. However, while the Enlightenment brought about radical change in many parts of the world, it also highlighted the inequalities that still existed. The ideas of freedom and equality that were championed by Enlightenment thinkers were often not extended to all people. Enslaved Africans, women, and indigenous peoples were often excluded from the benefits of Enlightenment ideals. The contradictions between the lofty ideals of liberty and the continued existence of slavery and patriarchy became a source of tension and conflict in the centuries that followed. Despite these contradictions, the Enlightenment set the stage for the modern world. It provided the intellectual foundation for the revolutions, the scientific advancements, and the social reforms that would follow. It challenged people to think critically about the world around them and to believe that human progress was possible. The Enlightenment wasn't just a philosophical movement. It was a call to action, a challenge to the status quo, and a vision for a more rational, just, and enlightened world. After the Enlightenment's intellectual upheavals and the transformative revolutions that followed, the world began to undergo another massive shift, one that would forever change the way people lived and worked: the Industrial Revolution. This period, which began in the late 18th century in Britain and spread across the globe, was a time of profound technological, social, and economic change. It took humanity from an agrarian, handcraft-based economy into one powered by machines, steam engines, and factories. The roots of the Industrial Revolution can be traced back to several key developments. First and foremost, there was the rise of new technologies that would change the face of production. The invention of the steam engine by James Watt in the 1760s was perhaps the most significant of these breakthroughs. Watt's improvement of the earlier designs for steam power made it possible to harness the power of steam for a wide variety of uses, from transportation to manufacturing. The steam engine revolutionized industries like textiles, coal mining, and iron production, all of which were critical to the development of the modern industrial economy. Factories that once relied on water wheels or manual labor now had access to a steady, reliable source of power. This made it possible to produce goods on an unprecedented scale. Textiles, in particular, were among the first industries to be transformed by mechanization. The spinning jenny and the power loom, which were invented during this period, made it possible to produce cloth more quickly and efficiently than ever before. The rise of factories and mechanized production systems had another profound impact. It changed the nature of work itself. No longer did people work as independent artisans or farmers. Instead, they became wage laborers in factories, working long hours under often brutal conditions. The factory system led to the creation of a new working class: men, women, and children who worked in factories, mines, and mills for wages. These workers were often subjected to harsh conditions: long hours, low pay, and dangerous working environments. This shift also brought with it significant social changes. The Industrial Revolution led to urbanization on a massive scale. People left the countryside in search of work in the new factories, and cities grew at an explosive rate. London, Manchester, and other industrial centers became symbols of the new industrial age. But as cities grew, so did the challenges of urban life. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and the spread of disease were rampant. In many ways, the new urban working class lived in conditions that were worse than those they had left behind in the countryside. While the factory system allowed for mass production, it also created immense wealth for some and extreme poverty for others. Industrialists, or factory owners, became incredibly wealthy, while workers struggled to make ends meet. The divide between the rich and the poor grew wider during this period, leading to new political and social tensions. This period also saw the rise of labor movements, as workers began to organize and demand better wages, working conditions, and hours. One of the most significant political responses to these growing inequalities was the rise of socialism and communism. Thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels criticized the capitalist system that was emerging during the Industrial Revolution. Marx, in particular, argued that the workers, or proletariat, were being exploited by the wealthy capitalists, or bourgeoisie. In his famous work, The Communist Manifesto, Marx called for the overthrow of the capitalist system and the establishment of a classless, stateless society. Though Marx's ideas were radical, they would go on to influence revolutions and political movements around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. But the Industrial Revolution didn't just bring about social and economic change. It also triggered technological advances that would change the world in ways no one could have predicted. The invention of the steam-powered locomotive and steamships revolutionized transportation. Goods could now be transported quickly and cheaply over long distances, which opened up new markets and created a truly global economy. The expansion of railroads in particular made it possible for people and goods to travel faster than ever before. This facilitated the growth of trade, helped unite distant regions, and spurred the development of new industries. The impact of the Industrial Revolution wasn't just felt in Europe and North America. As the century progressed, industrialization spread to other parts of the world. Japan, for example, rapidly industrialized during the Meiji Restoration, modernizing its economy and military. In China, however, the Industrial Revolution was a more complex story, as the country faced internal turmoil and external pressure from imperial powers. The effects of industrialization would be felt worldwide, from the colonies of Africa and India to the emerging economies of Latin America. The Industrial Revolution also sparked innovations in science and medicine. The development of new technologies led to advancements in chemistry, physics, and engineering. The creation of new machinery and tools made it possible to develop the modern technologies we take for granted today, from the automobile to the computer. At the same time, the growth of cities and the rapid expansion of industry led to public health reforms. Advances in medicine, such as the discovery of vaccines and the development of antiseptic techniques, helped improve the quality of life for many people. Yet, despite the many advancements, the Industrial Revolution also brought with it new environmental challenges. The rise of factories, steam engines, and mining operations led to widespread pollution. Rivers, air, and soil were contaminated, and deforestation became a significant issue as cities expanded and industrial sites multiplied. The environmental costs of industrialization became evident, but the urgency of economic growth often overshadowed these concerns. In many ways, the Industrial Revolution was both a blessing and a curse. It provided unparalleled progress in technology and industry, but it also created deep social divides, environmental degradation, and new challenges for workers and society at large. As the revolution unfolded, it became clear that while machines could make life easier, they also introduced a new set of problems that would need to be addressed. As the 19th century came to a close, the effects of the Industrial Revolution continued to ripple throughout society. The world was increasingly interconnected through trade, technology, and communication. The rise of capitalism, fueled by industrialization, created unprecedented wealth for some, but also exacerbated inequalities. The social and political challenges of this new world would lead to further revolutions, labor movements, and reforms in the 20th century. But despite the hardships, the Industrial Revolution changed the world forever. It led to the modern economy, the modern city, and the modern world as we know it today. It set in motion the technological and cultural advancements that would define the 20th century and beyond. And while it created new challenges, it also showed that human ingenuity and innovation could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The 20th century stands as one of the most transformative periods in human history. It was an era marked by two devastating world wars, rapid technological innovations, the rise of superpowers, and profound social change. From the first flight of the Wright brothers to the advent of the Internet, the world was irrevocably altered by the events, discoveries, and revolutions of the 1900s. This period saw the world move into a new era of human potential, but also, tragically, of global conflict and suffering. The World Wars, an age of destruction and transformation. The first great upheaval of the 20th century came with World War I, which began in 1914. Known as the Great War, it was a cataclysmic conflict involving many of the world's major powers, including Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. The war's scale and the devastation it caused, through trench warfare, new weapons like machine guns and tanks, and chemical warfare, ushered in a new understanding of the horrors of modern combat. It ended in 1918 with the Treaty of Versailles, which imposed harsh penalties on Germany, sowing the seeds of resentment that would later contribute to the outbreak of World War II. The aftermath of World War I saw major geopolitical shifts, with the fall of empires, most notably the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. The collapse of these empires led to the creation of new nations and borders, often leaving a legacy of conflict and division that would linger well into the 20th century. It also marked the beginning of the United States' emergence as a global power, while the Soviet Union rose to prominence as the world's first communist superstate. However, the world was not to enjoy peace for long. The deep economic turmoil of the 1920s, including the Great Depression, led to mass unemployment, poverty, and social unrest across much of the globe. The economic collapse in Europe and the U.S. created fertile ground for radical ideologies to take root. Fascism in Italy, under Benito Mussolini, and later in Germany under Adolf Hitler, became a direct response to the economic challenges of the time. Hitler's rise to power, along with the expansionist ambitions of Nazi Germany, sparked the outbreak of World War II in 1939. World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, would prove to be even more devastating than its predecessor. It involved nearly every nation on Earth and resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people. The war saw the use of horrific new technologies, including the atomic bomb, which was dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, killing hundreds of thousands and hastening the war's end. World War II also marked the beginning of the Cold War, the ideological and political struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union that would dominate the second half of the 20th century. In the aftermath of the war, Europe lay in ruins, and the international community sought to rebuild. The United Nations was established in 1945 to promote peace and cooperation among nations, aiming to prevent another world war. The Marshall Plan, initiated by the U.S., helped to rebuild war-torn Europe, and the European Union eventually emerged as a symbol of economic and political integration. Technological innovation, a leap into the future. While the wars of the 20th century were deeply traumatic, they also catalyzed remarkable technological advances. From the development of jet engines and the rise of the automobile industry to the breakthrough inventions of the computer and the atomic bomb, the century saw technology advance at an unprecedented rate. The early part of the 20th century was marked by the growth of the automobile industry, with Henry Ford's mass production techniques revolutionizing manufacturing. The Model T, produced in the U.S., became a symbol of industrial progress and made cars affordable for many people. The 20th century also witnessed the rise of aviation. In 1903, the Wright brothers made the first powered flight, an event that would soon be followed by significant advances in air travel. By the mid-century, commercial airliners made international travel a reality for millions of people, shrinking the globe and fostering greater global connectivity. The advent of the telephone, radio, and television transformed communication, bringing people together in ways that were previously unimaginable. By the mid-20th century, televisions were in nearly every home, broadcasting news, entertainment, and advertisements that shaped culture and public opinion on a global scale. But perhaps the most significant technological advancement of the 20th century was the development of the computer. The first computers were massive machines used primarily by governments and businesses, but over time, they shrank in size and became more accessible to the public. The personal computer revolution, led by companies like Apple and Microsoft, forever changed the way people lived, worked, and communicated. The creation of the Internet in the late 20th century was another world-changing development, allowing for the instant exchange of information and the creation of a global digital network. Social movements, striving for equality and civil rights. The 20th century was also marked by significant social movements that fought for equality and justice. Women, who had long been denied basic rights and opportunities, began to push for change in the early 1900s. The suffragette movement, which fought for women's right to vote, succeeded in many countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom, where women won the right to vote in 1920 and 1928, respectively. The feminist movement continued to grow throughout the century, with waves of activism advocating for equal pay, reproductive rights, and an end to gender-based discrimination. The civil rights movement in the United States, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, was another monumental social struggle. The fight against segregation, disenfranchisement, and discrimination, especially in the American South, was a long and difficult battle. The passage of landmark legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, marked significant victories in the fight for racial equality. Elsewhere in the world, the 20th century saw the rise of independence movements as former colonies sought freedom from European imperial powers. India, under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, successfully gained independence from Britain in 1947. Throughout Africa, nationalist movements led to the eventual decolonization of many nations, though the process was often fraught with conflict and struggle. The LGBTQ+ rights movement also gained momentum in the 20th century, as individuals began to push back against the stigma and discrimination they faced. Landmark events, such as the Stonewall riots in 1969, marked a turning point in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, and over time, attitudes toward gender and sexuality began to shift. The movement for equal rights and social acceptance continued to grow, culminating in the legalization of same-sex marriage in many countries by the 21st century. The Cold War and global shifts. In the wake of World War II, the world found itself divided between two ideological superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. This period, known as the Cold War, was marked by a global standoff between capitalism and communism. The fear of nuclear war, espionage, and the constant threat of military confrontation defined much of the 20th century's geopolitics. The Cold War was fought not through direct military conflict, but through proxy wars, such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. These wars were a battleground for the two ideologies, with the U.S. and the Soviet Union supporting opposing sides. While the Cold War didn't lead to direct war between the superpowers, it was a period of extreme tension and political maneuvering. The Cold War also saw the development of nuclear weapons to an extent never before seen, with the U.S. and the USSR building massive arsenals of weapons capable of wiping out entire nations. This created the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, where both sides were deterred from using nuclear weapons, knowing that it would lead to total destruction. The Cold War ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, bringing about a new era in world politics. As the 20th century drew to a close, the world entered a new era that was defined not by the military conflicts or the social movements of the past, but by an explosion of technological innovation. The digital revolution had arrived, and with it came a seismic shift in the way people lived, communicated, and interacted with the world around them. The rise of personal computers, the internet, and mobile technology began to radically change society. The tools that had been developed during the latter part of the 20th century reached their full potential in the 21st century, opening up new possibilities for work, entertainment, education, and even relationships. This digital age, characterized by rapid technological advancement and an ever-increasing interconnectedness, is one that has transformed virtually every aspect of modern life. The rise of the Internet, connecting the world, the most significant technological development of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, was the creation of the Internet. What started as a project to connect researchers and institutions for the exchange of scientific data quickly evolved into a global network that could be accessed from virtually anywhere on Earth. By the early 2000s, the Internet had become a central part of daily life for billions of people. The Internet revolutionized how people communicate. Email, instant messaging, and social media platforms allowed for instantaneous communication across borders, time zones, and cultures. People could now maintain relationships, share information, and conduct business in ways that were previously unimaginable. In fact, social media, which emerged as a powerful force in the early 2000s, would change the way people interacted with each other on a global scale. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube became the digital meeting places where people from all over the world shared their thoughts, experiences, and creative works. But the Internet wasn't just about communication. It was also about knowledge and access. Search engines like Google allowed people to find information on virtually any topic with just a few keystrokes. Online education platforms made learning accessible to anyone with an internet connection. For the first time in human history, knowledge wasn't confined to physical libraries or academic institutions. It was at the fingertips of anyone willing to search for it. The internet also led to the rise of e-commerce. Online shopping platforms like Amazon and eBay changed the way people purchased goods, making it possible to buy anything from groceries to electronics without ever leaving home. This shift had profound economic implications, transforming industries and creating entirely new sectors of the economy, including tech startups, digital marketing, and software development. The mobile revolution, taking technology everywhere. Just as the internet revolutionized the way people communicated and accessed information, the rise of mobile technology transformed how people interacted with the world around them. In the late 2000s, the release of the iPhone marked the beginning of the mobile revolution, bringing the power of personal computers to the palm of your hand. The iPhone, and smartphones in general, became much more than just phones. They became portable computers, cameras, and entertainment devices all in one. The ability to access the internet, send messages, make phone calls, and even watch videos on a single device changed the way people lived. Mobile technology allowed for greater flexibility and freedom. People could now work, learn, and socialize on the go. Smartphones also played a major role in the rise of apps. There seemed to be an app for everything, from managing your finances to tracking your workouts to learning a new language. The app economy exploded, creating a new sector in the global economy and giving rise to a new generation of entrepreneurs and innovators who developed apps that made people's lives easier, more efficient, and more entertaining. Mobile technology also sparked a major shift in the way people consume media. The rise of streaming services like Netflix, YouTube, and Spotify allowed people to access music, movies, TV shows, and other content on demand, whenever and wherever they wanted. The ability to stream content on mobile devices, combined with the growing popularity of social media platforms, fundamentally changed the entertainment industry, leading to the decline of traditional cable TV and the rise of digital-first platforms. The information age, big data, and artificial intelligence. The digital revolution also brought with it the rise of big data and artificial intelligence, AI. As more and more information was generated, collected, and shared through the internet, it became possible to analyze vast amounts of data in real time. This data, when properly analyzed, could reveal patterns, trends, and insights that were previously impossible to detect. Big data became a powerful tool for businesses, governments, and researchers, allowing them to make more informed decisions and predictions. Artificial intelligence, which had once been relegated to the realm of science fiction, became a driving force behind many technological advancements. AI is now used in everything from self-driving cars to medical diagnostics to customer service chatbots. Machine learning, a subset of AI, allows computers to learn from data and improve their performance over time. As AI technology continues to advance, it's likely that AI will play an increasingly prominent role in shaping industries like healthcare, finance, education, and entertainment. In addition to big data and AI, another major development of the digital revolution is the rise of cloud computing. Cloud services like Google Drive, iCloud, and Dropbox have made it easier than ever for people to store, share, and access data from anywhere in the world. Cloud computing has transformed the way businesses operate, enabling them to store vast amounts of data without the need for on-site servers and IT infrastructure. Social and cultural shifts. A changing world. Along with the technological advancements, the digital revolution has also brought about major social and cultural shifts. The internet and social media have transformed the way people engage with politics, culture, and activism. Issues that once remained local can now become global movements, thanks to the viral nature of social media. The Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and environmental campaigns like Fridays for Future have all been powered by the internet, allowing people to organize, raise awareness, and call for action in ways that were previously impossible. But the rise of digital technology hasn't been without its challenges. The spread of misinformation and fake news has become a major concern, particularly on social media platforms. The rapid dissemination of information, while empowering, has also made it easier for falsehoods to spread and for people to fall victim to scams and manipulation. The challenge now is finding ways to balance the benefits of digital connectivity with the need for accurate information and responsible communication. Another challenge has been the rise of digital surveillance. With so much of our lives now lived online, personal data has become a commodity that is often collected, analyzed, and monetized by corporations and governments. Issues like data privacy, online security, and the ethics of surveillance have become central concerns in the digital age, raising important questions about how we protect our personal information in a world where everything is connected. The digital revolution has also brought about significant changes in the workforce. Automation, powered by AI and robotics, is transforming industries and job markets. While technology has created new job opportunities, it has also displaced workers in certain sectors, particularly in manufacturing and retail. The shift towards a gig economy, where many workers are employed on a temporary or freelance basis, has changed the way people think about work and employment. As we move into the future, the question of how to adapt to these technological changes and how to ensure that workers are protected in this new economy will continue to be a key issue. The 21st century is often described as the era of globalization, a time when technology, trade, and communication have brought the world closer together than ever before. We live in a world where ideas, goods, and services can be exchanged across continents in an instant. The rise of the internet, coupled with advancements in transportation and international trade, has made it possible for individuals, businesses, and nations to connect and collaborate in ways that were once unimaginable. The rise of global trade and the digital economy, one of the key drivers of globalization, has been the expansion of international trade. The development of global supply chains, fueled by the rise of companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and others, has made it easier for businesses to reach customers around the world. Goods are now manufactured in one part of the world, shipped to another, and sold on a global scale. This interconnectedness has led to unprecedented levels of economic growth and has allowed countries to specialize in the production of certain goods and services, benefiting from comparative advantages. The digital economy has been a central part of this globalized world. E-commerce, online services, and digital platforms have created new opportunities for businesses to operate across borders. The rise of tech giants like Google, Apple, and Facebook has not only reshaped how we access information, but also how we communicate, shop, and entertain ourselves. The digital economy has blurred the lines between industries, creating new sectors like the app economy, the gig economy, and the sharing economy. Cultural exchange and the spread of ideas. Globalization has also led to a dramatic increase in cultural exchange. With the advent of the internet, streaming services, and social media, people are exposed to a wide variety of cultures, ideas, and art forms from around the world. Music, film, literature, and fashion now transcend national borders, creating a global culture that blends influences from every corner of the globe. The rise of K-pop, Bollywood films, and international culinary traditions are just a few examples of how globalization has fostered cross-cultural exchange. At the same time, globalization has made the world more interconnected, leading to the spread of ideas, movements, and ideologies. Social movements advocating for human rights, gender equality, environmental sustainability, and other causes now have global reach, empowering individuals and organizations to mobilize across borders. Movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and climate change activism have gained momentum on a global scale, showing that people can unite for change, no matter where they live. However, globalization has not been without its challenges. While it has brought people closer together, it has also exposed deep inequalities and divisions within societies. The benefits of globalization have not been evenly distributed. While some nations, particularly in the global north, have reaped the rewards of global trade and technology, many others, especially in the global south, have been left behind, struggling with poverty, lack of access to technology, and economic inequality. The environmental crisis. Global challenges in a globalized world. One of the most pressing issues facing humanity today is the environmental crisis. As the world becomes more connected, the effects of environmental degradation are also becoming more widespread. Climate change, deforestation, pollution, and the depletion of natural resources are not problems confined to any one country or region. They are global issues that require a coordinated global response. The effects of climate change are already being felt across the world. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and changes in agricultural productivity are having devastating impacts on communities, particularly in vulnerable regions. The need for a global response to climate change has never been more urgent. International agreements, like the Paris Agreement, which seeks to limit global temperature rise and reduce carbon emissions, are crucial in the fight against climate change. But implementation remains a major challenge. In addition to climate change, other environmental challenges, such as biodiversity loss and pollution, continue to threaten the planet's ecosystems. The burning of fossil fuels, the overuse of pesticides and fertilizers, and the expansion of industrial agriculture have all contributed to the depletion of natural resources and the destruction of habitats. This has led to an accelerated rate of species extinction, threatening biodiversity and undermining the stability of ecosystems that humans rely on for food, clean water, and air. The rise of plastic pollution, particularly in the oceans, is another major environmental issue. Every year, millions of tons of plastic waste end up in the world's oceans, where it poses a threat to marine life and ecosystems. Addressing plastic pollution requires both individual action, reducing consumption of single-use plastics, and systemic change, such as improved waste management and stronger regulations on plastic production and disposal. The future of work, automation, AI, and the changing job market. As we look to the future, one of the most significant challenges and opportunities of globalization is the future of work. Automation, artificial intelligence, AI, and other emerging technologies are rapidly transforming industries, and the way people work is changing as a result. Robots and AI systems are already performing tasks that once required human labor, and this trend is only set to increase. While automation has the potential to improve productivity and efficiency, It also poses a threat to jobs, particularly in sectors like manufacturing, transportation, and customer service. Jobs that once provided stable employment for millions of people are increasingly being replaced by machines. This is raising important questions about how workers will adapt to these changes and how societies will ensure that displaced workers have the support and opportunities they need to thrive in a rapidly changing job market. At the same time, automation and AI are creating new job opportunities in fields like data science, robotics, and cybersecurity. The key to navigating this transition will be education and skills development. As technology continues to advance, workers will need to acquire new skills to remain competitive in the job market. This will require investment in education and training programs that can equip workers with the knowledge and tools they need to succeed in a technology-driven economy. Global politics and the rise of new superpowers globalization has also led to the rise of new political and economic powers on the world stage. While the United States and the European Union have long been dominant players, countries like China and India are emerging as superpowers in their own right. China, in particular, has become a major force in global politics and economics, using its growing economic power and military might to assert itself on the global stage. The rise of China and other emerging economies is shifting the global balance of power. The United States, once the unchallenged leader of the post-World War II world order, is facing new challenges from these rising powers. This shift has led to increasing tensions in global politics, particularly in areas like trade, technology, and military influence. The ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China, for example, has far-reaching implications for global markets and international relations. In addition to these rising powers, regional conflicts and the struggle for resources continue to shape global politics. From the ongoing conflict in the Middle East to the tensions in East Asia, the geopolitical landscape is complex and often volatile. International institutions like the United Nations play a crucial role in addressing these challenges, but they are often limited by the competing interests of powerful nations. As the world becomes more interconnected, the challenges of global governance become increasingly difficult. The need for international cooperation on issues like climate change, trade, and security has never been more pressing. But finding common ground among nations with competing interests is often a slow and contentious process. As the world hurtles further into the 21st century, the digital age continues to evolve, and one of the most groundbreaking and transformative developments of this new era is the rise of artificial intelligence, AI. While AI has been a part of science fiction for decades, it has now become a reality, influencing everything from our daily lives to global industries. AI is revolutionizing how we work, communicate, and even understand ourselves. But with this revolutionary technology comes a host of new challenges, ethical questions, and unknowns. AI in everyday life, enhancing convenience and efficiency. In many ways, AI has already embedded itself into the fabric of modern life. Every time we ask a voice assistant like Siri or Alexa for directions, use a recommendation algorithm on Netflix or Amazon, or unlock our smartphones with facial recognition, we are interacting with AI. These systems analyze massive amounts of data and use complex algorithms to make predictions, recognize patterns, and assist in decision-making. AI's role in everyday life is growing rapidly. In healthcare, AI is being used to improve diagnostics and treatment plans. Machine learning algorithms can now analyze medical images to detect early signs of diseases like cancer, and AI-driven tools help doctors provide more personalized care for their patients. In transportation, autonomous vehicles powered by AI are being developed to revolutionize the way we travel, promising safer and more efficient roads. AI is also transforming industries like finance, education, and customer service. In finance, algorithms are being used to predict market trends, automate trading, and detect fraudulent activity. In education, AI-powered tools are helping to personalize learning experiences for students, providing tailored lessons based on individual needs. In customer service, AI chatbots are helping businesses answer customer inquiries quickly and efficiently, saving time and resources. The potential and the perils. Exploring the boundaries of AI. Despite the many benefits, the rise of AI raises significant questions about the future of work, privacy, and even the very nature of human decision-making. One of the most immediate concerns is automation and its impact on jobs. As AI and robotics continue to improve, more jobs are being replaced by machines, from factory workers to drivers and beyond. While automation can improve productivity, it also threatens to displace millions of workers, particularly in industries that rely heavily on manual labor. The impact of AI on the job market is already being felt, with industries like manufacturing and transportation undergoing significant shifts. In the United States, for example, the rise of self-checkout machines, automated delivery systems, and robotic assistants has led to job losses in sectors like retail and logistics. While AI also creates new job opportunities, the shift towards automation may not be quick or easy for those who are displaced. As a result, there is an increasing demand for policies that help workers transition into new roles and that promote reskilling and lifelong learning. Another major concern is privacy. As AI systems analyze vast amounts of personal data, from our online behavior to our health information, there are growing fears about how this data is being used, who has access to it, and whether it's being exploited. While AI has the potential to improve lives, it also presents significant risks in terms of data security, surveillance, and control. The Cambridge Analytica scandal and the use of AI in social media manipulation have shown how AI can be weaponized to influence political opinions and behavior. At the heart of these concerns is the question of accountability. When an AI system makes a decision, whether it's approving a loan, diagnosing a disease, or recommending a job candidate, who is responsible if something goes wrong? If an AI system is biased, faulty, or makes an error, who will be held accountable? These are questions that we are only beginning to grapple with, and they will become increasingly important as AI systems become more autonomous and influential in our lives. AI ethics, the question of control. One of the most pressing ethical concerns surrounding AI is the issue of control. As AI systems become more advanced, there are fears that we may lose control over the very technology we've created. The possibility of creating machines that can think, learn, and make decisions independently raises questions about the future of humanity itself. Could AI eventually surpass human intelligence? And if it does, how do we ensure that AI remains aligned with human values and interests? This concern has led to the development of AI safety and ethics as fields of study. Experts in AI and machine learning are working on creating algorithms and guidelines that prioritize human well-being, fairness, and transparency. They are also working to ensure that AI is developed and used responsibly without causing harm or exacerbating inequality. For example, AI researchers are developing methods for explainable AI, which aims to make AI systems more transparent by allowing humans to understand how decisions are made. This is particularly important in high-stakes applications like healthcare, law enforcement, and finance, where the consequences of AI decisions can be life-altering. By making AI systems more understandable and predictable, we can increase trust and accountability. In addition to transparency, there is growing concern about the potential for AI to perpetuate or amplify existing biases. AI systems are trained on data, and if that data contains biases, whether based on race, gender, or socioeconomic status, those biases can be reflected in the AI's decisions. This has already been observed in several high-profile cases, such as biased algorithms in hiring processes or criminal justice systems. Addressing these biases is a critical challenge that AI researchers and policymakers are working to overcome. AI and the future of humanity. Opportunities and challenges. Looking ahead, the potential applications of AI are nearly limitless. In the coming decades, AI could help us tackle some of humanity's most pressing problems, from curing diseases to solving climate change. AI has the potential to revolutionize industries like energy, agriculture, and transportation, making them more sustainable and efficient. It could lead to breakthroughs in medical research, enabling us to cure diseases that were once thought to be incurable. AI-powered robots could help clean up the environment, perform dangerous tasks, and assist people with disabilities, improving quality of life for millions. But with all of these opportunities come challenges. The rise of AI will continue to disrupt the job market, create new ethical dilemmas, and raise concerns about privacy and control. We must ask ourselves, how do we ensure that AI serves the common good? How do we balance innovation with responsibility? How do we prepare for a future where AI plays an increasingly central role in our lives? The future of AI is uncertain, and the decisions we make today will shape the world that future generations will inherit. The key will be to strike a balance between technological progress and ethical responsibility, ensuring that AI is developed and used in a way that benefits all of humanity, not just a select few. In the end, AI is a reflection of our own values and ambitions. It has the potential to elevate humanity to new heights, or to exacerbate the challenges we already face. The choice is ours to make. As we look toward the future, one of the most significant aspects of the 21st century is the unprecedented level of global connectivity we now experience. The digital revolution, which began in the late 20th century, has fundamentally changed the way we interact with one another, communicate, work, and even think. But while the opportunities for global collaboration and connection are greater than ever before, so too are the challenges. The rise of the internet, social media, and mobile technology has created a world where information travels instantly, and borders seem almost irrelevant. We live in a world where anyone with an internet connection can access knowledge, build relationships, start businesses, and participate in global conversations. Yet, with this newfound interconnectedness comes a series of challenges that require careful consideration, as the digital world is no longer just a tool for progress. It has become a powerful force that shapes nearly every aspect of our lives. The digital divide, unequal access to technology. One of the key issues in our increasingly connected world is the digital divide, the gap between those who have access to digital technologies and the internet, and those who do not. While many parts of the world enjoy widespread access to smartphones, broadband internet, and digital services, billions of people remain without reliable access to these technologies. According to the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, approximately 3.7 billion people still do not have access to the internet, and millions more are underconnected, with limited access to the tools and services they need to fully participate in the digital economy. This digital divide has serious consequences. In an age where education, healthcare, and employment opportunities are increasingly mediated by technology, those without access to the internet are at a distinct disadvantage. Without access to online learning tools, students in rural areas or underdeveloped countries are unable to compete with their peers in more connected parts of the world. Without access to telemedicine or digital health services, individuals in remote areas may struggle to receive proper medical care. And without access to job search platforms and digital marketplaces, many people find it harder to find work or build businesses. The digital divide is not just a matter of access. It's also about the quality of access. In many parts of the world, even when people have internet access, it is slow, unreliable, or expensive. This can create an environment where the digital revolution only benefits a small percentage of the population, while the rest are left behind. Bridging the digital divide is one of the most pressing challenges for policymakers, governments, and technology companies, as it holds the key to ensuring that the benefits of the digital age are accessible to all. Privacy and data security. The dark side of the digital age. As the digital world expands, so too does the collection of personal data. Every time we use a search engine, post on social media, or purchase goods online, we leave behind a trail of personal information. Companies, governments, and other entities collect this data, using it for everything from targeted advertising to law enforcement surveillance. In many cases, we willingly share our data in exchange for free services or convenience. But the vast amounts of personal information being collected raise serious concerns about privacy and data security. The issue of data privacy became especially prominent following the rise of social media platforms like Facebook, which collect massive amounts of personal data from users. The Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2018, where millions of Facebook users' data was harvested without their consent, brought the issue of data privacy to the forefront of public consciousness. In the wake of this scandal, there has been increased scrutiny of how tech companies collect, store, and use personal data. Governments around the world are beginning to implement stricter data privacy laws, such as the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which gives individuals more control over their personal data and places greater responsibility on companies to protect it. But despite these efforts, the challenges surrounding privacy and data security remain significant. Data breaches, where hackers gain unauthorized access to personal information, are increasingly common. The rise of surveillance capitalism, where companies profit from tracking and analyzing our behaviors, is another growing concern. Additionally, the use of AI and big data analytics has raised questions about how much control we are willing to give up over our own lives in exchange for convenience and personalized services. As we move forward, the need for stronger regulations, greater transparency, and a renewed commitment to data protection will be essential. Ensuring that individuals can maintain control over their personal information will be one of the defining challenges of the digital age. The ethics of artificial intelligence, navigating the uncharted waters of automation. Another critical issue in the digital age is the ethical implications of artificial intelligence, AI, and automation. As AI becomes more integrated into our lives, it raises profound questions about decision-making, fairness, and accountability. AI systems are increasingly being used in areas like hiring, criminal justice, healthcare, and even military operations, making decisions that can have significant impacts on people's lives. One of the key ethical challenges of AI is ensuring that these systems are fair and unbiased. AI is trained on data, and if the data used to train an AI system is biased, whether due to historical inequities or the biases of those who collect and interpret the data, the AI system will likely reproduce and amplify those biases. This has already been seen in the criminal justice system, where predictive policing algorithms have been shown to disproportionately target minority communities, or in hiring algorithms that favor certain demographic groups over others. There is also the question of accountability. If an AI system makes a decision that leads to harm or injustice, who is responsible? Is it the company that developed the AI, the person who designed the algorithm, or the AI itself? These questions are complex, and as AI continues to evolve, they will require careful consideration. The challenge will be to ensure that AI systems are transparent, explainable, and aligned with human values, so that they can be used to benefit society while avoiding harm. The future of democracy. Maintaining freedom in the digital age. As the digital age continues to unfold, it has brought new challenges to the realm of politics and democracy. The rise of social media has radically changed the way political campaigns are run, how news is consumed, and how political opinions are formed. While social media platforms have allowed for greater political engagement and participation, they have also led to the spread of misinformation, echo chambers, and the manipulation of public opinion. The role of social media in elections has become a hot topic in recent years, particularly after the 2016 U.S. presidential election, when foreign actors allegedly used social media to influence voters and spread disinformation. The manipulation of social media platforms for political gain has raised serious questions about the integrity of democratic processes and the potential for digital platforms to undermine the very foundations of democracy. In addition to disinformation, the digital age has also brought about concerns about privacy and surveillance. Governments and corporations are collecting vast amounts of data on citizens, raising questions about the erosion of personal freedoms and the balance between security and privacy. In some cases, governments have used technology to crack down on dissent and restrict free speech, as we've seen in countries with authoritarian regimes that use digital surveillance to track and suppress opposition. The challenge for democracies in the digital age will be to protect freedoms while also addressing the risks of misinformation, manipulation, and surveillance. Finding a balance between open access to information, individual privacy, and the integrity of democratic institutions will be one of the key issues facing global society in the years to come. As we move further into the 21st century, technology has increasingly become a key player in shaping the future of education. With advancements in digital tools, online platforms, and AI-powered learning systems, the ways in which students learn, access information, and engage with teachers are evolving at an extraordinary rate. The digital revolution has expanded opportunities for education, making learning more accessible, flexible, and personalized than ever before. However, this shift also raises important questions about the future of traditional education, equity, and the role of technology in shaping young minds. The rise of online learning, expanding access and flexibility. One of the most significant changes in education over the past decade has been the growth of online learning. The internet has transformed how educational content is delivered and consumed. From primary and secondary schools to universities and adult education programs, online platforms have made it possible for students to access lessons and courses from anywhere in the world. Platforms like Coursera, Khan Academy, and edX have democratized access to education, allowing anyone with an internet connection to take courses taught by top professors and experts from prestigious institutions. This has opened up opportunities for learners who may not have the financial resources or the ability to attend traditional brick-and-mortar institutions. People in remote areas, working adults, and those facing financial barriers to education now have the chance to gain valuable skills and qualifications that can improve their lives and careers. For students in K-12 education, the pandemic accelerated the adoption of online learning. With schools closing in the wake of COVID-19, millions of students around the world had to shift to virtual classrooms. While the transition was challenging for many, it also highlighted the potential of technology to enable continuous learning, even in times of crisis. Virtual classrooms, video conferencing tools, and collaborative platforms became essential for maintaining education during the pandemic. While in-person learning has resumed in many places, the lessons learned during this period are likely to shape the future of education for years to come. Personalized learning. Tailoring education to individual needs. One of the most exciting possibilities offered by technology in education is personalized learning. Traditionally, the education system has followed a one-size-fits-all approach, where all students are taught at the same pace and in the same way. However, research has shown that each student learns differently. Some students excel with visual learning, while others may benefit from auditory or hands-on learning experiences. Personalized learning, powered by AI and data analytics, allows for a more individualized approach to education. AI-based tools can analyze a student's strengths, weaknesses, learning style, and progress, and then adapt lessons accordingly. For example, platforms like Dreambox and Smart Sparrow use adaptive learning algorithms to personalize lessons in subjects like math and science. These platforms can identify areas where a student is struggling and provide targeted exercises to help them improve, while also accelerating learning in areas where the student excels. Personalized learning also allows for more flexibility. Students can learn at their own pace, choosing when and how they engage with lessons. This is particularly beneficial for students with different learning speeds, those who need extra time to grasp concepts, or those who are ready to move ahead faster than their peers. Additionally, personalized learning provides more opportunities for lifelong learning, allowing adults to return to education at any stage of life and receive an education that meets their specific needs and goals. Challenges of technology in education. Bridging the digital divide. While the benefits of technology in education are clear, there are significant challenges to overcome. The digital divide, which we've already discussed in the context of global connectivity, is one of the most pressing issues facing education today. While many students in developed countries have access to high-quality digital tools and resources, millions of others around the world lack the basic infrastructure to engage with online learning. In many rural or low-income areas, students do not have access to reliable internet connections or modern devices like laptops or tablets. This lack of access exacerbates educational inequalities, particularly when students are expected to participate in online classes or access learning materials online. According to the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, nearly 3.7 billion people still lack internet access, and the majority of them are located in developing countries. This creates a massive gap in educational opportunities for students in these regions, who may be unable to participate in the digital learning revolution. Even in countries where digital infrastructure is strong, there are disparities in access. Students from lower-income families may not have the same access to technology as their wealthier peers, putting them at a disadvantage. Moreover, even when students have access to technology, they may not have the skills or support to use it effectively. Teachers, too, need training and resources to integrate technology into their classrooms successfully. In many parts of the world, there is a significant gap in digital literacy among both students and educators. To address these issues, governments, nonprofits, and tech companies must work together to ensure that all students have access to the tools and resources they need to succeed. This includes investing in infrastructure, providing affordable devices and internet access, and offering digital literacy programs to both students and teachers. Only by bridging the digital divide can we ensure that all students, regardless of their background, have the opportunity to benefit from the educational possibilities that technology offers. The role of AI in shaping future education, a double-edged sword. Artificial intelligence is one of the most powerful tools shaping the future of education. As we've already seen in personalized learning, AI has the potential to revolutionize how students are taught and how they learn. By analyzing vast amounts of data, AI can predict student performance, identify areas where students need help, and provide tailored learning experiences. But AI in education also raises significant concerns. One of the primary concerns is data privacy. As AI systems collect and analyze data on students, including their learning behaviors, preferences, and even emotional states, there is the risk that this sensitive data could be misused or fall into the wrong hands. Education is already a heavily data-driven field, and the increasing reliance on AI amplifies these risks. It is crucial that strict data protection regulations are put in place to safeguard student privacy and ensure that their data is used responsibly. Another concern is the potential for AI to replace teachers. While AI can certainly enhance the learning experience and provide valuable insights, it cannot replace the human element of teaching. Teachers are not only educators, They are mentors, guides, and role models who provide emotional support and inspiration to students. The idea of AI replacing teachers in the classroom is both unrealistic and undesirable. Instead, AI should be seen as a tool to assist teachers, not replace them. By automating administrative tasks and providing personalized learning support, AI can free up teachers to focus on the aspects of education that require human empathy, creativity, and insight. The future of education. Embracing technology with responsibility. Looking ahead, the future of education will likely be shaped by a balance between technology and traditional teaching methods. As AI, virtual reality, and other advanced technologies become more integrated into the classroom, they will provide new ways for students to engage with content, collaborate with peers, and receive personalized instruction. However, the human element of education will remain crucial. To ensure that technology serves as a tool for enhancing learning, not replacing it, educators must be empowered with the resources and training they need to navigate the digital age. Students should be taught not only how to use technology, but also how to think critically about it, how to navigate the digital landscape responsibly, how to protect their privacy, and how to use technology for positive purposes. Ultimately, the goal of education should be to prepare students for the future, not just by teaching them how to use technology, but by fostering the critical thinking, creativity, and empathy that will allow them to thrive in an increasingly complex, connected world. As we continue to move into the future, technology will undoubtedly play an even greater role in shaping education. But the responsibility lies with all of us, educators, policymakers, parents, and students, to ensure that the digital tools we use are harnessed for the benefit of all learners, creating an educational environment that is inclusive, innovative, and transformative for everyone. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the global political landscape is undergoing a dramatic transformation. The rise of new powers, the emergence of non-state actors, and the rapid development of technology are reshaping how countries interact with one another and how global issues are addressed. The end of the Cold War brought about a unipolar world dominated by the United States. But today, we are witnessing a multipolar world, where multiple powers are asserting themselves on the global stage. This shift in power dynamics is accompanied by growing challenges in governance, diplomacy, and international cooperation. The rise of China, a new global power. One of the most significant developments in global politics over the last few decades has been the rise of China as a global power. Once a relatively isolated nation, China has emerged as the world's second-largest economy and a key player in international politics. The country's rapid economic growth over the past few decades has transformed it into a major force in global trade, manufacturing, and investment. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure project aimed at building trade routes across Asia, Europe, and Africa, is an example of its growing influence. China's rise has had a profound impact on the balance of power in the 21st century. The United States, once the dominant global superpower, now faces competition from China in areas such as trade, technology, and military power. The growing economic ties between China and countries around the world have made it an essential partner for many nations. But its increasing assertiveness in global politics, particularly in the South China Sea, and its human rights record, has raised concerns. China's rise has also sparked a technological race. The country is investing heavily in AI, quantum computing, and 5G technology, positioning itself as a leader in the next wave of technological innovation. This has led to competition with the U.S. and its allies, who have expressed concerns over China's growing technological influence and its potential for surveillance and control. The U.S. and the shifting role of superpowers. While China's rise has been a defining feature of global politics in recent years, the United States remains a dominant force in international affairs. However, the U.S. is no longer the unquestioned leader of the global order. The challenges to U.S. hegemony are multifaceted, from China's economic and technological rise to the increasing power of regional actors like India, Russia, and the European Union. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 marked a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy, as his America First approach challenged long-standing international alliances and multilateral institutions. Trump's withdrawal from international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, as well as his trade wars with China and Europe, signaled a retreat from the global leadership role traditionally held by the United States. While the Biden administration has sought to restore U.S. leadership in global affairs, the challenge of balancing domestic priorities with international commitments remains. One of the major issues facing the United States is the changing nature of power. In the 20th century, military might and economic influence were the primary tools of global power. However, in the 21st century, soft power, diplomacy, culture, and ideas has become just as important. As new actors and global institutions emerge, the U.S. must navigate a more complex international environment, where power is increasingly diffuse and multidimensional. Russia and the return of geopolitical competition. While China's rise has been the most significant shift in global power, Russia has also reasserted itself as a major geopolitical player. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia spent much of the 1990s and early 2000s in a period of economic decline and political instability. However, under President Vladimir Putin, Russia has sought to regain its influence on the global stage. Russia's involvement in conflicts like the annexation of Crimea in 2014, the war in Syria, and its support for separatist movements in Ukraine has made it a key player in global geopolitics. Russia's aggressive foreign policy and its efforts to challenge Western influence have led to tensions with the United States and the European Union. The country's military capabilities, particularly its nuclear arsenal, make it a formidable force, and its increasing cooperation with China has raised concerns in the West about the formation of a new power axis. Russia's actions have led to growing discussions about the role of military force in international relations. While Russia's military actions are often seen as a response to NATO's expansion and Western influence in Eastern Europe, they have also raised questions about the legitimacy of using force to achieve geopolitical objectives. As the world's attention shifts toward the emerging power of China, Russia continues to position itself as a major player in global geopolitics. The European Union, unity and division in the 21st century. The European Union, EU, is another key player in the evolving global political landscape. Originally created to foster economic cooperation and prevent future conflicts in Europe after World War II, the EU has grown into a political and economic union that includes 27 member states. The EU has played a central role in promoting peace, democracy, and economic development in Europe. However, in recent years, the EU has faced significant challenges. The rise of nationalism and populism in many European countries has led to tensions within the Union, with some member states questioning the benefits of EU membership. The Brexit referendum in 2016, in which the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU, was a dramatic sign of these growing divisions. The EU also faces internal challenges related to economic inequality, migration, and security. The European debt crisis of the early 2010s revealed deep divisions between wealthier countries like Germany and poorer countries like Greece, raising questions about the EU's ability to manage economic crises. Meanwhile, the influx of refugees from conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa has sparked debates about migration policy and the EU's commitment to humanitarian values. Despite these challenges, the EU remains a major force in global politics. It is the world's largest single market, and its influence on trade, climate change policy, and human rights continues to be significant. However, as the world becomes more multipolar, the EU's ability to maintain its cohesion and global influence will be tested. Non-state actors. The rise of transnational forces. In the 21st century, global politics is no longer dominated solely by nation-states. Non-state actors, including multinational corporations, international organizations, and grassroots movements, have become increasingly influential. These actors operate across borders and often challenge the authority of traditional nation-states. Multinational corporations, for example, have become powerful players in global trade and politics. Companies like Apple, Amazon, and Google have more economic power than many nations, and their ability to shape global markets and influence public policy is immense. The rise of big tech has also raised concerns about monopoly power, data privacy, and the ethical responsibilities of companies that control vast amounts of personal data. International organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization continue to play critical roles in addressing global issues such as peacekeeping, public health, and trade regulation. These organizations, while often limited by the political will of member states, remain essential for managing global cooperation in a variety of areas. Grassroots movements, meanwhile, are increasingly influencing global politics. From climate change activism, led by figures like Greta Thunberg, to protests against inequality and injustice in Hong Kong, Brazil, and the Middle East, the voices of ordinary people are shaping political discourse in ways that were once unimaginable. The digital revolution has played a crucial role in amplifying these movements, allowing people to organize, share information, and mobilize across borders. The future of global politics. Cooperation, competition, and the road ahead. As the world continues to change, the future of global politics will depend on how nations, organizations, and individuals navigate the complex challenges and opportunities presented by globalization. The rise of new powers, the growth of technology, and the demands of environmental sustainability will continue to shape the direction of global affairs. In the coming decades, the world will likely see increased competition for resources, technological dominance, and military power. At the same time, there will be growing pressure for international cooperation on issues like climate change, public health, and economic inequality. The future of global politics will require nations to balance their own national interests with the need for collective action to address the pressing challenges of the 21st century. As the world becomes more interconnected, the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and understanding between nations cannot be overstated. The global challenges of the future will require innovative solutions, cooperative efforts, and a renewed commitment to shared values of peace, justice, and sustainability. The question is, will the world rise to the occasion, or will geopolitical rivalries and division prevent us from overcoming the challenges ahead? As we look toward the future, the path ahead is filled with both uncertainty and possibility. The 21st century has been marked by rapid advancements, unforeseen challenges, and shifts in power that continue to reshape the world as we know it. The digital revolution, globalization, the rise of artificial intelligence, and the increasing interconnectedness of our world have transformed nearly every aspect of our daily lives, our societies, and our global institutions. But while these changes bring about enormous opportunities, they also introduce new dilemmas that we must navigate with care, responsibility, and foresight. The future of technology. A double-edged sword. Technology has undoubtedly been one of the greatest driving forces of the modern world. From the internet to AI, from smartphones to self-driving cars, technological innovations have revolutionized how we communicate, work, and live. They have made life easier, more convenient, and more connected than ever before. And yet, as we continue to advance technologically, We must confront the ethical, societal, and environmental implications of these advancements. One of the most pressing concerns is the question of automation. As AI and robotics continue to improve, millions of jobs across various sectors are at risk of being replaced by machines. This shift has the potential to dramatically reshape the global workforce. While automation can lead to greater efficiency and productivity, it also presents a massive challenge for workers who find themselves displaced by technology. Governments, businesses, and communities will need to work together to ensure that workers are not left behind in this new era of automation. Another challenge is the issue of privacy. As technology becomes more embedded in our daily lives, the amount of personal data being collected and stored by companies and governments is staggering. From our online behavior to our health records, from our shopping habits to our location data, everything we do is being tracked, analyzed, and used to build detailed profiles of who we are. While this data can be used to improve services and provide personalized experiences, it also raises serious questions about surveillance, data security, and individual freedoms. The need for strong data protection laws, privacy regulations, and ethical guidelines has never been greater. Climate change and sustainability. A global crisis. One of the greatest challenges we face as a global community is climate change. Over the past century, human activity has significantly altered the planet's climate, and the effects are already being felt. Rising temperatures, extreme weather events, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss are just some of the consequences of the environmental damage we have caused. The fight against climate change will be one of the defining struggles of the 21st century. The global response to this crisis will require cooperation, innovation, and radical shifts in how we produce and consume energy, food, and resources. Renewable energy sources like solar and wind power, electric vehicles, and sustainable farming practices will be crucial to reducing carbon emissions and mitigating the effects of climate change. But these solutions will not come easily. Transitioning to a sustainable future will require significant investment, political will, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. One of the challenges in addressing climate change is ensuring that the most vulnerable populations are not left behind. While wealthier nations have the resources to transition to green technologies, poorer countries may struggle to adapt to the changing climate and invest in sustainable infrastructure. Climate justice, which calls for fair treatment and support for those most affected by environmental degradation, must be a key consideration in global climate policy. The future of democracy. Defending freedom in a digital world. As the world becomes more connected and information flows freely across borders, the future of democracy is facing new challenges. The rise of social media, the spread of misinformation, and the increasing power of tech giants have all complicated the relationship between democracy and the digital age. While the internet and social media platforms have democratized access to information, they have also created new avenues for manipulation, polarization, and control. The spread of fake news, echo chambers, and online hate speech has made it more difficult to have productive, fact-based conversations. Political leaders can now communicate directly with their followers, bypassing traditional media channels. But this also means they can use these platforms to spread misinformation and divide the electorate. Furthermore, the rise of surveillance capitalism, where companies collect and monetize vast amounts of personal data, has raised serious concerns about privacy and individual rights. The tension between freedom and control in the digital age is something that democracies must address. As technology continues to evolve, it will be critical to ensure that democratic values are upheld and that individuals have the right to privacy, freedom of expression, and the ability to participate in a fair and transparent political process. The changing nature of global cooperation. Will we rise to the occasion? The challenges we face as a global community, whether climate change, inequality, global health, or political instability are interconnected. The only way we can address these challenges effectively is through international cooperation. But the rise of nationalism, populism, and protectionism in many parts of the world has made it harder for countries to work together toward common goals. As the world becomes more multipolar, with emerging powers like China and India asserting themselves on the global stage, it is clear that no single nation can solve these problems on its own. We need a new kind of global cooperation, one that transcends national borders and addresses the shared challenges we face as a species. Whether it's addressing climate change, managing global health crises, or promoting peace and security, the ability of nations to cooperate will determine the future of humanity. One of the most pressing issues in global cooperation is the reform of international institutions. The United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and other multilateral organizations were designed for a different era. They were created in the aftermath of World War II, during a time when the world was divided into clear spheres of influence. But today, the global political landscape is far more complex, and these institutions must adapt to the changing dynamics of global power. The future of humanity: innovation, adaptation, and resilience. As we look ahead, it's clear that the future will require both innovation and adaptation. We are entering an era of unprecedented change, one that will test our resilience, creativity, and ability to work together. The challenges we face are immense, but they are not insurmountable. Through technological innovation, collaboration, and a commitment to shared values, we have the potential to build a better, more sustainable future for ourselves and for generations to come. One of the keys to navigating this future is resilience, the ability to adapt to change and bounce back from adversity. Whether it's dealing with the impacts of climate change, coping with the disruptions caused by automation, or overcoming political polarization, the ability to remain flexible and resilient will be crucial. We must embrace new technologies, ideas, and ways of thinking, while also preserving the values that have made us human: compassion, justice, and a commitment to the common good. As we move forward, let us remember that the future is not predetermined. It is something that we can shape through our actions, our decisions, and our willingness to work together. The road ahead may be uncertain, but it is also full of possibilities. Together, we have the power to create a world that is more connected, more sustainable, and more just. The question is, will we rise to the occasion?